The king woke to the slow taste of iron and the knotted ache that lived now beneath his ribs. It was not the roar and blaze of pain that had dragged him to the brink of the black, not the bright-flung agony of the boar's tusks. This was duller, a heavy stone set inside him, a weight he would carry for as long as breath chose to stay. He tasted blood, though no blood lay upon his tongue. Memory found its own metal. He lay in the great bed they had moved into the quietest chamber of the Red Keep, a room without balcony, whose windows faced the river and let in only a gentle, greenish light, as if he lay at the bottom of some slow-moving stream. The bedposts were carved with stags, their antlers polished by generations of hands. He could see their eyes when the torches were low at night and the maester's leaves rustled like a forest beyond firelight. A fly knocked itself against a pane of glass. It had escaped the summer heat to die here, while he had escaped dying to live. Robert watched the fly trace a stupid path and thought, not without sour amusement, that here was a subject fit for a poet. A king and a fly, both too stubborn to fall. When he shifted, the wound tugged and he swore under his breath. Maester Pycelle had told him he mustn't swear. He must save his strength for healing. Strength for healing. He had wanted strength for hunting and feasting, for the open sky and the cudgeling laughter of men with meat-slick fingers. He had wanted strength for wine, truth be told, and now the word tasted like vinegar. He remembered Lancel with that smug, eager look he had begun to wear, the easy, fawning obedience that was not obedience at all but some Lannister breed of mockery. He remembered the wine. He remembered a boar big as an ox crashing through the brush. Then a short, bright film of tusks, of hooves breaking earth, of air that smelled like torn ferns and hot breath and his own blood. A whisper of movement drew his eye. Ser Barristan Selmy stood near the door, the white of his cloak gathered in his arm. The old knight's head bent slightly as if listening to something the stone itself had to say. Barristan knew the language of stones, and of swords, and of vows. He did not turn yet, but Robert knew that he saw him. "I'm not dead, Selmy," Robert said, and his voice came thick and cracked. Surprised him. He had never heard his voice without the long, effortless boom of it riding ahead, clearing tables and making girls look over their shoulders and laugh. The voice he had now was the voice of a tired man. "No, your grace." Ser Barristan's answer was soft and simple as water in a cup. He moved closer, and the leather of his sandals made a slight sigh against the floorboards. "The realm will be grateful," Robert grunted. "The realm has no idea what it wants." He looked again at the window. The light was moving. The day must be leaning toward afternoon. "Where is my hand?" "Lord Eddard waits in the antechamber," Barristan said. "He has kept the river of men from flowing into your room. Others have wished to pay respects." "By which you mean take the measure of my ribs. See how many breaths are left in them." He tried to rise, and the weight inside him dragged all the world down. Barristan stepped forward and laid a steadying hand on his shoulder. It was a light touch, careful as if he were a young man holding a newborn. Robert breathed through his teeth, a little hiss he would have mocked in any other man. "Send Ned in." Barristan inclined his head. He turned and said something to the shadows. The door whispered. The hand came on quiet boots that had learned the Red Keep long ago and still did not trust it. Ned Stark smelled of cold iron and horse, even here. He had the bookish look of a man who had spent nights without sleep. His jaw was bristled, not from slovenliness but from care. He had always been a spare man, made of lean lines the North had drawn, but now Robert thought he had the look of a straight-limbed tree that had been struck and not fallen. The bark blackened, the core sound. Robert tried a smile that was not comfortable on his face. "If I grin too wide," he said, "I will split like a rotten melon. Sit, nederst. I want no bowing and scraping. I've had enough of it to sicken a giant." Ned said. He looked at Robert's bandaging, at the stain where the maester's salves had seeped, and his eyes were the color of stones sunk in a brook. "You should not speak much," he said. "You should not tell me what to do." Robert waited for the old jest, the easy shape of it in his mouth, and found himself too tired to push it all the way. Out with it. You have a face that would make a boy put down his toy and stand straight. I've been long enough in the dark. Tell me what the day is." Ned's hand settled on his knee. He seemed to think that through before he spoke. "The city is quiet, for now. The small folk whisper, as they do, but there is no unrest. Lord Renly has gone south for a time to visit Highgarden, at the Tyrell's invitation. Lord Stannis holds Dragonstone. Your queen keeps close counsel with her family. My queen broods in a nest of red cloth and gold thread and sends boys to pour me wine." The old, sudden heat flared at the memory, and with it a twist of the wound so keen it brought a sheen of sweat to his upper lip. "I'll have Lancel whipped until he walks like a crab." "Lancel is a boy," Ned said quietly. "The king is a man." And the king was aflame with grief that day, the grief men call anger so they can wield it like a cudgel. The king wanted to cease thinking. Wine is the thoughtlessness of kings. Robert drew breath slowly. The air tasted of lavender and dust and something medicinal he would have called a cowardly plant once. "I don't recall asking for a sermon. It was a bad hunt. We've all had them. That boar. I've bested wild bulls with less fury in them. It seemed he had been put there to answer a hedge witch's curse. It seemed he had been fed on men's plans," Ned answered, and for the first time there was a slight hardening in the voice. "Robert, listen to me. I told you I had to show you a thing. Not to embarrass a queen nor to punish a boy, but because truth is truth. I should have done it sooner. I waited. I will not pretend I did right, but I will not wait longer." "Then stop circling it and put your spear in," Robert muttered. He watched Ned's hand go inside his cloak and come out with a worn book. He knew it. He remembered it half-drunken one afternoon, Ned's grim finger on the page, the dull song of names and hair. He wished to fling it across the room, to be a young man again and call such a book a maester's toy, to drink and roar and hunt until the world folded away from him. But the stone inside him weighed down every impulse. Ned opened the book. He spoke in a voice that had nothing of accusation in it, only the slow gravity of winter. He spoke of Baratheon children and Lannister children, of black and gold and what begets what, of nature stubborn as a mule. He spoke of the boy Joffrey and of Tommen and of Myrcella and of a man who had worn white for most of his life and had not kept his vows in a private place where vows were meant to matter most. He spoke of the queen. When he finished, the room listened to the slow tick of a distant clock. The fly had found the sill and lay on its side and kicked one leg as if the wood were water and it were trying to swim. Robert put his hand to his mouth not to stifle a cry. He had never been proud of such neatness, but to steady it. His thumb pressed against the old scar near his upper lip, the one he had got as a squire when he had fallen out of a saddle and bit the earth. "By all the gods," he said. The words came out thick. Then, because the stone needed something to hit, the heat inside him found the only target it could. "I might have broken his nose years ago and spared us all a kingdom's worth of trouble." "Jaime," Ned said. He did not make the half-jest, did not take the easy anger proffered. He looked at Robert as if he were trying to see through his friend to the boy they had both been. "You cannot undo the children." The king swallowed. He felt suddenly very old. Not worn like a cloak, but old like a tree left too long in a storm. "No," he said, "but I can make it so a boy who is not mine does not wear my crown. I can make it so he does not touch it." He closed his eyes. It made the room tilt. When he opened them, Barristan stood very still, the white cloak parting around his shoulders like snow.
"Ser Barristan."
"Your Grace, if I asked you whether a Kingsguard may break the Queen's head like a melon, what would you tell me?" "I would tell you no one may break the Queen's head," Barristan said, with only the faintest suggestion that he had heard a different question beneath the words. "But the king may ask his hand to set his house in order." Ned breathed in, out. "Your Grace, this will be dangerous. We should send for your brother. We should summon Lords Arryn and Tully and Stark and Tyrell and Martell and Lannister. No, not yet. We should summon the lords who owe you love and fear both. We should summon Lord Stannis." Robert remembered a winter in the Stormlands, 2 boys together on the battlements of Storm's End, the sea throwing up froth at them like a challenge. He remembered Stannis then as he had been, drawn tight, already at 12 a fist of a boy. Stannis, who had kept Storm's End through siege while Robert broke Rhaegar on a river. Stannis who had no talent for smiles. He said at last. Stannis. He will be glad to see the truth become a weapon. He will swing it until his arms fall off. We shall have need of Renly, Ned added. We shall have need of 100 men who are not too clever to be loyal, Robert said. He closed his eyes again, not to summon sleep but to summon steadiness. Right? Tell Stannis he is my heir. Tell him to come with speed and with strength and without priests, if he is toting any. Write to Renly to keep his pretty friends close and his mouth shut until he sees my face. Tell him if he spoils this with a featherbed plot, I'll tan him in the streets. Tell him I said so. And you,
Ned leaned.
You keep my children close where I can see them. Robert tasted the words and found they tasted like a thing torn from him. I say my because I raised them, not because of their blood. The boy will think he is wronged. He will be afraid. There is no telling what a Lannister does between fear and pride. Ned's eyes softened, then hardened again. Sansa is betrothed to Joffrey. I will have to break that if you will. I will, Robert said. Better a little girl's tears than a realm's blood. He swallowed. He thought of his own daughter years ago. No, he had no daughter. He had bastards like autumn apples that fell where they might. He thought of a girl with sand in her hair and a fierce little chin. Faces came to him with the clarity of drunk memory, sharp-edged and shimmering. Be quick, Ned, or else be relentless. I don't have a third thing to offer you. There was a rustle at the door. The smell of scented powder came first, then the man who wore it. Varys seemed to form out of the air itself, his soft slippers making no sound. His hands folded beneath the plush fall of his sleeves. He bowed and his round head shone like a moon caught in a net. My king. The eunuch's voice was the sound of honey poured in winter. I rejoice to find you in a condition improved. Robert watched him, and for a moment found himself unable to summon the old impatience or disdain. There was something about surviving a boar's tusk that robbed a man of the delight in easy loathing. Varys had brought him truths in the past and poisons too. It was sometimes one and sometimes the other, and sometimes the truth was poison. Spare me the prayers, Robert muttered. If you have news, tell it. If you have none, make some. Varys's eyes flicked toward Ned and then back to the king. There is news. He tasted the word as if confirming it on his own tongue. Not from within the city, where the usual intrigues coil and uncoil as politely as ever. From across the narrow sea. From where the wind grows hotter. Robert's ribs seemed to remember how to pull tight. He said nothing. Ned's hand went still on the book, then slowly closed it. The Targaryen girl, Varys breathed. The one wedded to the Horse Lord. Widow now, alas. She has, mayhaps as the old songs once foretold, awoken stone. There are whispers my king carried like sparks. They say she has birthed dragons. In the soft-bellied quiet of the room, the word fell like a thrown chain. Barristan, who did not startle, started. Ned's face did not change, but the hand under the cloak became very still. Robert's heart, which had been moving like an ox dragging a plow, jerked forward once and then discovered it could move faster if it wanted. Say that again, he said. The voice he found was steady. They have hatched, Varys said. From eggs long thought to be pretty baubles. On a funeral pyre, they say. The caul lies ash. The child lies ash. The Maggie lies ash. The world is ash. And from it came 3 small fires that breathed the same. He lifted his hands mildly, as if he offered a dish. You remember how rumors are. The first bowl is smoke. The second bowl has some meat. The third bowl burns the tongue. Robert felt the room tilt, though he lay flat. He thought of the skulls he had taken down to make room for his hunting trophies. The old dragon heads that had stared down and mocked him when he first came to the Red Keep. He remembered the cool, cavern-like hush of that hall and how the skulls looked like mountains that had forgotten their skin. He had mocked them. He had mocked a great many things. He had been young. Where? Ned asked, the word coming out like he was setting a stake. Where is she? In the east, Varys murmured. Past the cities men make and unmake and make again. In a place the Dothraki call a great silence. Her Khalasar has withered to a handful of hawks. They limped to the sea, and now, if the sea will be their friend, they turn their eyes toward the islands where commerce pays no heed to kings. The word comes by way of a friend of a friend. His eyes flickered. Robert thought of fat men in pentos who had kissed his cheeks. I would not put it in the royal mouth as a proclamation. Not yet. But it is enough for the small hall in the night. Enough to make men take down old songs and open them. Robert felt a strange, clean edge open in him. It had the taste of something he had not let himself taste in years. A sense that the world still had big enemies to put a hammer to. Not another boy with a pretty helm and better words than heart. Not another council meeting where petty wills made mud of a decision. A dragon. A dragon was simple. A dragon had a head. You met it and either you died or it did. He had always been better at that. Except he was no longer that man. He could barely sit without a white-haired knight's hand at his shoulder. A dragon would not wait for him to be young. You are certain these are not the dreams of a wine-sick sailor? He asked. He listened to his own voice and heard nothing but the careful iron of it. I am certain of nothing but death and taxes, Varys replied with the faintest curve of a smile. But I consider the likelihood significant. The fires in the east ripple through many curtains. Get out, Robert said. Not forever, until I call you back. I want. He did not look at Ned when he said it. I want to speak with my hand. Varys bowed, deep and grave and smoothed. He retreated like silk being drawn through a ring. Barristan did not move until he had gone, then settled again by the door, a white mountain at the edge of the room. Ned breathed once and let it out. If it is true, he said, it changes things. It changes nothing. Robert bit, and then, because the force of the words hurt him, added, it changes everything. Damn it all, Ned, I wanted to fight I knew how to fight. Not the sort where I must count how many cups the queen pours or how many looks a boy makes. Dragons. He closed his eyes and saw a white cape in a corridor and a golden hand in a dark room. He opened them. I should have killed the girl when I had the chance. You sent men to do it, Ned said, and there was no reproach in it. They failed. The gods gave you that failure. It saved you from a shame. Does honor feed small folk? Robert muttered. Is honor proof against fire? He dug his hand into the linen sheet until the wound's tug reminded him. We will have no peace while any Targaryen breathes and has more than a pretty name. I learned that in the cradle. If she has dragons, small now, true, but things grow. Boys become men. Calves become bulls. Fire eats. Ned looked down at the book in his lap. He touched its broken spine with a thumb, as if it were a living thing and he wished to soothe it. The truth about your children and the truth about hers, he said, like a man measuring one cold against another. You cannot fight both at once. Not without tearing yourself open. Watch me. The old pride pushed up, and with it a groan and a flash of pain that made the pride look like a boy capering in the yard. Robert gripped the edge of the bed. No. You are right. We must step like men crossing ice. He stared at the window until the green light softened around the edges. Do what must be done with the queen. Quiet. And send men to the free cities who have eyes like knives and hearts like sand. Men who will not be bribed by the sight of a dragon egg or the notion that they pee reason. And write to Stannis. Write to Renly. The stag lowers his head. The lions have had their prowl. Ned rose. I will begin at once. Bring me my son, Robert added, and when he found the word on his tongue, he did not correct it. Bring me, the boy, Joffrey, and Tommen, and the girl. Bring them to me one by one. I will look at them. He swallowed, tasting a ghost of wine and ash. I will look at them. Ned bowed his head and left by the door that never squeaked. Robert lay back and let the weight of his own body hold him still. That night, when the torches were brought in and the rushes stirred under soft feet, when Pycelle changed dressings and droned the words he always droned, when the last murmur of the keep sank into the stone, Robert dreamed. He dreamed he was a younger man with a hammer and a fury too big for any chest, bellowing at a prince whose hair was a black river and whose eyes were calm like grief. He dreamed he stood in a hall with dragon skulls like mountains, and instead of his trophies hanging there were the heads of men he had called friend, and they spoke in the way that trophies do when a man has drunk enough. They told him what he had done and what he had not done. He dreamed he stood in Storm's End with the sea throwing its salt at him, and a boy stood beside him with Stannis's tight mouth and Renly's sweet eyes, and the boy said nothing at all because he was not a real boy, only a thought. When he woke at last, moonlight made a white road across the floor. He lay very still and listened to his own breath and knew that the world had changed beyond the window like a game someone had moved a piece in. Dragons. The word coiled around his ribs and drew them tight. He would meet them with iron and fear and laughter, the only weapons he remembered how to use. He had to live long enough to use them. In another part of the city, behind a door whose hinges had been oiled that day, the queen sat with her hair unbound and let her maid brush it in long, careful strokes. Cersei had a face for the day and a face for the night. She had a mirror. Ours knowledge of both. Tonight the night's face was the one she wore, the one that looked like a woman who had learned to sleep with knives under the bed. Gentle, she said without needing to say it, and the girl's hands were already careful. The chamber smelt of orange flower and warmed beeswax. Cersei watched herself in the glass and thought that a woman could be made to feel like a girl if the light was kind enough. She thought of the king and how he had not died. It had been, she would admit it only to the dark, which kept better counsel than any friend. A surprise to find herself surprised at her own surprise. She had not wanted him dead. She had wanted him contained, and death did that too well. Death made a memory of a man, and memory can turn a brute to a giant and a lout to a laughing hero. She had never feared Robert's fists as much as she had feared what his death would make of him in the mouths of men. He had not died. He would now be more difficult than death. He would be a man with a wound and a reason. She heard whispers like mice in walls. She had seen the way Stark had moved through the keeps these days. Not triumphant, not fearful, but bearing. As if he carried not a sword but a burden. It was a look that made men step out of his way without knowing they had stepped. He asked to see the children, she said aloud, though the girl behind her was no one worth speaking to. Of course he did. Yes, my lady, the girl said. Cersei did not correct her. Joffrey will go, Cersei murmured. She thought of Joffrey's mouth, the set of it, how he spoke when he was pleased and how when he was displeased. She thought, with a pang like stepping on something sharp, of when he had been a toddler and had put his hand into a candle and looked at the burn with amazed curiosity rather than pain. He will go and he will hold his head as if it were steadied by a wire. He will make the mistake he always makes, which is to believe the world will forgive him the way his mother does. Her eyes met themselves in the mirror. She was proud of the steadiness there. A lioness, for all that men like to turn that into a jest. She had learned a lioness's lesson too. That a pride was a thing made of movement, of keeping the cubs within the circle while the males paced. The door opened without sound. Jaime came in roomsure as always. He brought with him the smell of oil and sword leather. He closed the door and stood with his head tilted just so. That look of a man who had secrets and had made them into his person. He lives, he said. He does. Jaime's eyes moved to the girl, who dipped and fled. He turned the latch. And Stark knows. Stark has known since before the boar, Cersei said. She smiled without teeth. Stark was born with the knowledge that we all have secrets. It is his only comfort to imagine they can be purged by weather. Jaime leaned on the edge of the table where her combs lay. He picked one up and turned it in his fingers as if it were something dangerous. If he goes to Robert, the game becomes a board full of red pieces. Tywin will march. Stannis will come. Renly will preen. There will be a great deal of honor in the streets, which is to say blood. Cersei smoothed her nightgown over her knee. "He has gone already," she said. "Do not pace after moves that have been made. Think of the moves that are left you." Jaime smiled the way he smiled when a blade was in his hand in a tourney, not when it was in a man in a battlefield. "I have fewer moves than I enjoy. The vows are chains, even when they fit nicely." "You will not let them chain you," Cersei said, and stood, and in standing made the room hers again. She went to Jaime and put her hands on his waist as if she were fixing a belt. "Do not fear for me. Fear for our children." He looked down at her. There was a question in his eyes he did not ask because the answer would be nothing new. "What do you want me to do?" "Listen to the stones," Cersei said, and inclined her head toward the wall that separated them from the king's rooms. "Ser Barristan is there, and Eddard Stark walks in and out like a ghost. They speak of Stannis. They speak of—" She paused, because even to speak it seemed to risk making it heavy. "Dragons." She smiled when Jaime's face did not change. "Rumors out of the east. The Targaryen girl. If dragons come again, words will fly like cinders. Men will make themselves kings out of ash." "Dragons are for songs," Jaime said. "This is a city of stone and excrement. Songs have always been more dangerous than stone." Cersei turned away and went to the window. She pushed the shutter half open and let the night on her face. "Send Tommen and Myrcella to Casterly Rock. Quietly, with men who can speak to the sea without shouting. Joffrey stays. If the king means to call him to his side like a child whose father wishes to see his eyes, let him see them. We cannot make a coward of the boy when the whole city watches. He must look like a stag, even if the antlers pinch him." Jaime put down the comb. His hand brushed a chime and it rang like an idea. "I will go to him." Cersei closed the shutter. The night retreated. "Wear your white like innocence," she murmured, "and keep your gold under it." Far from that city, beyond the green and the gray of the narrow sea, the air was a different thing. It did not hold damp. It did not soothe. Scoured. It moved across the skin like a whisper that wanted to be a command. The land was red and broken, and yet it held its own stark beauty. Lines that the wind had written and would rewrite. Daenerys Targaryen stood in the morning before the sun had broken the rim of the world and watched the smoke from last night's fire unravel into the palest blue. She held her arms wrapped around her middle not for cold, but to hold herself together. She had not wept. It had not occurred to her yet that she could. The place inside her that had once filled with fear and with hope had been emptied and refilled with something that did not wish for either. It wished for movement. Something warm and sinuous climbed her shoulder. Little claws ticked against her skin. She tilted her head, and Drogon, that was the name she had given the Black One, though he was not only black. He drank light and gave it back in a thin shimmer of red, placed his narrow skull at the crook of her neck and breathed. The breath was not fire. It was a sifting heat, the kind that lies on coals after the flames have fallen. Rhaegal crouched on the branch they had dragged up and smelt of green smoke and wet iron. Viserion, pale as old gold, lurked beneath her hair like a jewel a thief had yet to steal. Last night, the fire had been the kind men make, fed with wood and fat and grief. And yet it had become another thing. She had walked into the heart of it and found that she did not burn. She would think of this later and be afraid of it, perhaps as a child remembers the first step it took and how the world did not end, only changed. But this morning she did not think yet. She watched the little beasts with a tenderness that surprised her eyes but not her hands. The hands knew what to do. They had known since she had lifted eggs that should have been nothing and found that they were something after all. Jorah Mormont came careful, as if his steps might wake a power best left asleep. He had slept near enough to guard her and far enough to show respect, though his body's long ache had begged to give up dignity and lie like an old dog in the warm. He had not slept much. He had sat with his sword on his knees and looked into last night's final embers as if they might take pity and tell him which way the world would lean. He stopped before her now and bowed, willing his armor to be silent. He had scrubbed blood and ash from it with sand until his fingers were raw. He had seen many strange things, Mormont, and believed in very few. But the line between belief and obedience had been blurred for him when the little beasts had clawed their way out of the stone and woken. "Khaleesi," he said softly. She turned her head and looked at him. She looked the way people look after a long fever that does not take them. A little thinner than the day before, and yet there was a new shine in the eyes, a new steadiness in the mouth. "Ser Jorah," she said. Her voice was slight and sure. "Tell me what we have." "We have water enough for 7 days, if we do not drink like horsemen," he said. "We have dried meat for 5 if we call it meat and not give it a better name. We have 23 souls, counting the child on Irie's hip and the 3 dragons on your shoulders, who eat less than a sparrow but make men eat their words. We have 2 good horses and 8 that feel the miles like old men feel winter. We have 3 mules. We have your will." He paused because the list said aloud sounded like a thief's tally rather than a queen's. "We have a coast 2 days' march to the south, if I am reading the sun correctly. We have ships somewhere on it, if the gods are in a mood to prove they still exist." "They exist," Daenerys said, and put her hand lightly on Drogon's head. He made a sound that was not a purr and not a hiss but something in between, and leaned. "Do you see them, Ser Jorah?" He lifted his eyes to the hard sky. "I see the sun, Khaleesi, and the edge of the world." She nodded, not as if he had displeased her, but as if she had confirmed a mapping she had already made in her mind. "We will go to the sea," she said. "We will make the dragons love the smell of salt. We will teach them to hunt fish. We will find a ship. A ship will take silver," Jorah said. He kept the distress from his voice. It was not that he did not believe. It was that belief did not put brine on a tongue or wind in a sail. "We have some. We have what the Khalasar left in fear. We have your eggs." "They are not eggs," she said and smiled faintly, like a woman correcting a child on a matter of moral import. "They are these." Her hand stroked Drogon's spine. He was warm as an ember in her palm. "We will not sell them. We will sell the things the dead have no use for." She looked past him at the little cluster of people who had clung to her when the horses scattered. Women whose eyes watched everything, old men who had been valued only because they knew the small songs that clothe mornings, boys who watched the dragons with mouths open and hands fisted hard so they would not reach. "We will sell what the dead would have burned with them. They do not need carpets on the other side of the fire." Jorah inclined his head. He would have argued once. He would have spoken to her like a father, out of fear of the sea and the cities. He found that he could not. The dragons were not merely proof of old stories. They were sentence endings. He adjusted the sword at his hip. "Yes, Khaleesi." The morning moved. The dragons wanted meat. They did not know yet how to take it from the world. She fed them with small strips she had cut from a rabbit that had made the mistake of pausing too long near a slow trap in the night. She spoke to them nonsense and old words she half remembered from a cradle she barely remembered at all. Regal licked her fingers with a tongue rough as chain. Viserion blinked with the solemnity of a priest. Drogon chewed and then sneezed a little thread of light that singed the hair on the back of her hand. She laughed. It made the others look up with something like fear and like love. They set out before the sun was high. The ground threw light in their faces. The dragons folded themselves around her like living ornaments. One at her throat, one at her shoulder, one a little jealous on her other shoulder, and the little caravan moved toward the idea of water. They did not sing. They had no songs for this. The wind sang for them and told them there would be sand soon, and after that a smell that was neither ash nor horse. In King's Landing, the smell of the day was baked stone and cabbage. The king ate boiled fish for his dinner, and the fish had bones that hid in its flesh and made themselves known only when a man laughed. He did not laugh much. He wore a shirt that had ties instead of buckles because buckles required a strength he would not spend, and he suffered Pycelle to fuss at the bandages because he had no patience left to spend on a public scene. He sent Pycelle away as soon as he could. The old man bowed and droned and had eyes that skittered off the king like a fly from a hot stone. Robert had never been more certain of his dislike. Joffrey came with a pace he had chosen carefully, halfway between a boy's hop and a man's stride. The boy's hair was like sunlight on wheat, almost ridiculous in its insistence. He had his mother's mouth. He had his own eyes, which had not learned how to keep secrets yet. Robert watched him enter and thought of the time before the boar, of 100 dinners, of the way the boy had cut meat as if it were an enemy and looked at servants as if he were bored of them. He tried to find something in himself like pity, because Ned Stark would have found some, and because pity had once been easy for Robert. It would not come. He felt only a frail, deep sorrow that this was a boy and that someone had asked him to be a king. "Father," Joffrey said, and bent his knee with a stiffness. "Boy." Robert made his voice light with an effort and then let it fall. "Come close. I won't throw a plate at you." Joffrey came until he was within the reach of a stick. He stood very straight. Robert looked at him and tried to see what he could call his. The stance? No. The line of the jaw? Perhaps. The scale of the hands? He did not know. Blood was a strange accountant. It kept its own books. "You will sit," Robert said at last, because his side had begun to pull. "On the stool, not on the chair." Joffrey's eyes flickered toward the chair that stood near with its carved arms. He sat on the stool and tried not to look as if he noticed the difference. "You wanted to see me," he said. Robert had prepared a speech in his mind, the kind of thing he could imagine Jon Arryn coaxing out of him once upon a time. It had a beginning and a middle and an end, and there were words in it like duty and steel and temper. It left him now like wine poured into a thirsty ground. "You are a boy," he said. "I am near to a man," Joffrey said quickly. "You are a boy," Robert repeated. "And there are men in this world who will look at you and see a king, whether you are good at it or no. That is a pity for them and a danger for you. When men look at a boy and see a king, they forget what a boy is. They forget that a boy has blood like a spring in him that can be spilled." Joffrey's mouth tightened, then softened, as if he were entertaining and rejecting a dozen expressions. It was like watching a bard try too many endings to a song. "Are you afraid for me?" he asked, and Robert could not tell whether the question was mockery or hope. "Of course." Robert shifted. The room seemed to settle. "Your mother tells you that fear is for the small. That is because she was born large. I was born large too. It is easy to disdain what you do not feel every day. I will teach you fear. It is a friend. You wear it like a shirt under armor. It keeps you from doing a stupid thing when a clever thing will do. Keeps your head on your neck. It keeps your crown." He stopped himself, not out of mercy, but because the word had nearly dragged him forward into something he had not yet decided how to say. "It keeps you breathing." Joffrey sat with his hands on his knees. He looked at the king and was astute enough for a moment to see a man rather than a father. "You think I am a fool," he said, and there was less sting in it than there might have been yesterday. "I think you are a boy." Robert let his head fall back against the pillow and looked at the cracked plaster of the ceiling. "And I think you have been allowed to believe a great many things because the people around you prefer not to fight you for them. The world will fight you. It will not care that you are my—" He stopped, and when he began again his voice was cleaner. "That you are a prince. It will think you are a thing to bend or break." Joffrey took a breath as if to answer with a fine phrase he had practiced and then stopped. "What would you have me do, then?" he said, and Robert felt a thin blade of surprising affection move through him for the boy's quickness. "Learn to sit a horse without grinning at yourself," Robert said. "Learn to hold your drink without letting it hold you. Learn to cut meat and not a man at table. Learn to be quiet when a better man is speaking. Learn to speak when a weaker man is being crushed by silence. Learn the names of your knights and your cooks both. Learn the names of the men who pick up the filth in the streets. Learn the smell of rain before it comes." He let his eyes close, not to shut the boy out but to keep something in. "And when you see a dragon, do not try to pet it." Joffrey blinked. "A dragon? Go," Robert said, suddenly tired of his own courage. "Send in your sister." Sansa came like springtime, even in the sour room with its broth and linen. She kept her eyes lowered and lifted them only when she had arranged herself so prettily that the lifting would be a gift. Robert watched her and thought of girls he had known, first as a boy, then as a man who had been made a boy by wine and by the suddenness of battle. He did not speak roughly to her. He asked after her lessons, after her singing, after the dogs she thought were too large and the dresses that were in truth merely more silk than any child required. He did not speak of Joffrey. He did not say that he would unmake a promise that had been a girl's crown. He let her go with kindness, which cost him more than rage had ever cost him. Tommen came like a boy comes, earnest and a little breathless, his hands sticky with something he had eaten too soon and too happily. Robert smiled at him without trying. The boy's smile answered like a small dog wagging its tail. They spoke of hounds. They spoke of meat. They spoke of a game with wooden soldiers and how it was sometimes noble to lose so one's opponent might feel grand. Robert sent him away with a ruffle to the hair and a morsel of something sugared and felt, for a moment afterward, forgivable. They did not bring Myrcella. The queen sent word that the girl had a cough. Robert did not push. There were only so many things a man could force in a day and remain whole. When the room emptied again, Ned came and sat and told him of the letters sent. He spoke of Stannis and Renly, of a courier bound for the Stormlands with breath enough for 2 horses, of men Ned trusted. He spoke of the city watch and a man they called the Hound who had no love for anything but killing, and how such a man could be turned to oaths if one were careful. He spoke like a man laying stones for a bridge over a river that might not wish to grant one. Robert listened and found that the old thrill of campaign had not left him. The sound of logistics, food, letters, names, the way a realm became a host and a host became a willing hand. When Ned left, night had already come again. The moon had moved. It made a different road now across the floor, and Robert watched it and thought of roads that crossed water. He would need ships. He would need men who had once loved to sing about dragons to remember that songs had teeth and carried disease. He would need to live. At Dragonstone, the sea spoke with the voice it had always had. The hiss and boom that made men believe there were gods in it whether or not there were. Lord Stannis Baratheon stood on a parapet that had not been built be. Why men? Men had added stones to fit their feet on, but the bones of the place had been put there before time turned polite and looked at the water. He had a letter in his hand. It was the second letter that day. The first he had read alone in the solar until the candle gutters had trembled with the force of his anger. The second he read now under a clean wind because anger in a wind does not feel the same. He wore his mouth as he always wore it, pressed flat. He wore his hair closely because it was easier to care for and because vanity disgusted him and because he did not like the way wind took long hair into its mouth and laughed. He wore a cloak that was plain and his sigil that was plain, and under all that a sense of being wronged that he kept ironed and folded, that it might not become useless habit. The letter in his hand said the thing he had known it would say since the day he had looked too long at Robert's children and seen what he was not supposed to see. It said the thing that had sat in his bones like cold. It was written in Ned Stark's neat hand, which made Stannis approve of it and scorn it at once. It said that Robert was alive and meant to do what was right. It said that Stannis must come and stand where he should have stood years ago if the world had not arranged itself to thwart him. It said dragons had hatched, as if the gods had decided that men's trouble was too simple and needed seasoning. Behind him, soft as if the air itself were being unrolled, the Red Woman came. Melisandre had a way of arriving like a consequence rather than a person. She stood, and the wind played with her hair as if it were trained to love it. She did not speak at first. She rarely broke the back of a silence when a man could be made to break it himself. "Say it," Stannis said at last, because he found himself ridiculous to be standing with a letter like a boy with a toy. "The night gives birth to things when the day has grown lazy," Melisandre murmured. "Your brother's life is a coal the god did not let go dark. The other fire has been woken in the east. I told you they would stir. I told you the old world would scrape its eyes and seek again." "You tell me a great many things," Stannis said. He did not turn around. He did not like to give any listener his profile. "Some of them are true. Some of them are coins with only one side. Robert wishes me to come. The hand's letter says as much. He wishes me to stand by him and hold the truth like a flag. I will come." "You will come," she agreed. The wind tugged at her red. "And when you come, I will make for you a banner that is more than cloth. Stannis tightened his grip on the letter. He thought of Dragonstone's small garrison, of the ships that sulked like tired horses in the harbor. He thought of Renly and how the boy could make men laugh and how laughter had a way of making swords find hands. He thought of his brother and the way Robert could look at him and not see him, the same way one overlooks a bench on the way to a table. He thought of a girl in the east with dragonfire in her hair. It did not shake him. He had been shaken so long the shaking had become the stillness he knew. Send for Davos, he said. We will sail with the tide. And send a letter to my brother that is more salt than honey. He has had his fill of sweets. In the city, Varys closed a door and stood with his forehead briefly against the cool wood. He had not yet allowed the tiny tremor that wished to run through him. Dragons. He could imagine their little claws on the world. He could imagine a child laying one against her throat as if it were a jewel. He could imagine a boy with a shaved head raising his eyes to a boat's mast in a storm and thinking that all storms are God's. He went to his table. He sat. He took out a new sheet of parchment and began to write a letter whose words he had considered for years and hoped not to write for 10 more. He did not write the words he wanted to write. He wrote the words that would make men move in the direction he needed, which was never the same as the direction that stood closest to truth. He was very good at this. He took no joy in it. He had not taken joy in anything since he had been a boy, and a voice had been taken from him that had never been in his throat to begin with. By morning a mood had come over the city like a light fall of rain. It made the dust lie. It made men walk with a bit of caution, as if the streets were slick. Robert broke his fast on bread and salt pork and the idea of being alive. He told Ned to bring him the Master of Coin and the Lord Commander of the City Watch and 2 men Ned swore for with his life. He wanted to set a ring of iron around the Queen's wing without making a clang of it. He wanted to count gold with Littlefinger without touching any of it. He wanted to take a breath without wincing. Littlefinger came smiling and went away smiling and left behind a suspicion like a smell of perfume in a room that had held men sweating. Janos Slint came, solid as a barrel and twice as dull. He bowed crookedly and smiled in a way that showed teeth and fear together. Ned stood where he always stood, one hand on the edge of the table, as if the table were a cliff and he were preventing it from falling. We will replace Lancel with a man who knows the difference between wine and oil, Robert said, when the time came to stop talking of mummers and start talking of knives. We will move the Queen's bed like a thief moves a trinket, quietly, when she is not in it. We will place my children under guard I can trust. He looked at Barristan and saw, on that weathered face, the slightest movement of something like relief and like grief. I have made much of weight jokes at your expense, Selmy, he said, and the old knight's eyes warmed. You will forgive me. I need you. You have me, Barristan said. He touched the pommel of his sword like a man who touches a prayer bead. You have always had me. Robert nodded and swallowed a pain he had not planned for. After we have done with this, we will eat a heart's heart and talk of the days we thought would not end. The city had heard wilder speeches. It had believed in less. But the true language of a city like King's Landing was not spoken aloud. It was the language of boots and carts, of doors opening and shutting, of a boy running across a square with his hair in his face, of a girl looking over her shoulder as if she had heard a dragon. The pyromancers woke to their jars and found their wildfire licking higher. It had a new smell in it. They sent one of their own with trembling hands to the Red Keep to request a royal audience. The man got lost in corridors and told his news to a guard, who told it to a cook, who told it to a whore, who told it to a septa, who told it to herself and thought it a sin to know. In the street behind the Street of Flower, a boy practicing with a stick against a barrel took a blow from the barrel that knocked the wind out of him. He lay on his back and saw a gull hanging in the sky like a god's coin. He thought, without knowing why, of bones bigger than houses. By the end of the second day, the letters had gone, and at least one of them had already been stolen and copied and sold. The Queen had sent out a carriage that looked like it carried gowns and carried 3 trunks that groaned because trunks cannot be brave. The men who drove it had the look of men convinced that the trick of escape lay in moving without seeming to be moving. They went east. They went west. No one noticed. Everyone noticed. On the morning of the third day, Ned came to Robert with a face that had a new line in it. "Stannis has answered," he said. Robert took the parchment and read. Stannis's hand was as tight as his mouth. The words were iron filings. They scraped the eyes. He promised speed. He promised truth. He promised nothing else. "Good," Robert said, and meant it. He folded the letter very carefully with fingers that belonged to a younger man and handed it back to Ned. "And Renly writes like a man at a feast," Ned said dryly. "He offers 10 kitchens and 12 banners and 7 knights who can break lances the way other men break bread. He suggests that you might wish to come to Highgarden to see the roses. He suggests that if Stannis is to be heir, the realm will need balm for the part of itself that likes to laugh." Robert grunted. "Let him laugh. If he laughs while he marches, so much the better. Tell him to bring his roses and their thorns both." He did not say that the thought of Renly at Highgarden made him feel a twist of something like jealousy for a thing he had never wanted. He did not say that he had seen the look in Renly's eyes that young men get when they see a great house open its doors and realize the food is for them. He did not say that a king sometimes envied a lord because a lord could be beloved simply for being beautiful and giving good wine. When he was alone again, Robert took the lineage book from where Ned had set it and opened it. He turned the pages. He found his own name among the stags and the lines that had been meant to run straight. He found the place where the ink had lied for him. He closed it and put it aside. He would not look at it again for a long time if he could help it. There are truths that help a man stand up and truths that make him sit down. That night it rained, the first rain since the boar. It came soft and then hard, but never the beating rain of the Stormlands that had made him learn to shout so men could hear his voice. Came like a washing. The gutters spoke. The river swelled a little. The city breathed. In that rain, a small ship eased out of the shadow of the cliffs at the mouth of the Blackwater and put to sea without lights. In it were 2 children whose hair gold could not weigh down and a few women who knew how to be nannies and wolves in the same breath. In it were trunks that groaned. In it was fear that did not call itself fear because fear wore a Lannister lion on its breast and preferred to call itself prudence. It turned west. The sea accepted it the way a table accepts a plate, without comment. In the Red Lands, the sea came into sight like a promise men had made long ago and forgotten to keep. The little caravan stopped at the lip of a rise and stared. Irri sobbed without meaning to. Rakharo laughed and yelled something to the gods of the Dothraki who lived nowhere near water. Jorah put his hands on his hips and looked like a man who had found a coin in the road and was trying to decide if it was real. Daenerys stood still. The dragons stirred on her shoulders. They smelt it, salt and life and all the little deaths that salt kept from rotting. At the shore, the world was a new sound. The water bit at the land and the land set its teeth and they went on doing it because that is what they had always done. There were ships. There are always ships at a shore where men sell fish and other men buy song. Jorah waded out into the shallows to speak to a man with his hair bound up in a little cloth and his shirt open to his belly. Daenerys watched and found that the sight did not please her or displease her. It simply fitted. She watched a gull land near and pick at something soft and thought, without deciding, that she would teach the dragons to pick at gulls later if the fish proved too slippery. By noon the next day, she had bought passage. She had not spent the fortune of a queen. She had spent carefully. She had spent like a person who knew what it was to have a coin and not another one to follow it. Jorah had argued for a larger ship. She had chosen a smaller. It would be faster. It would also be more dangerous. She had grown less afraid of danger since the night she had not burned. They went aboard. It smelt of rope and tar and men's old food and, beneath, the large breathing of the sea. The dragons crouched on the rail and looked at the water as if it were a rival animal. Drogon hissed at a wave and the wave hissed back and Daenerys laughed without fear. The captain crossed himself in an old, private way and told himself it was to ward off bad luck rather than to say that he had not seen what he had just seen. The ship shoved its nose into the south. The coast unrolled like a story told by a man without talent. Daenerys stood on the deck with her hands on the rail, Her hair whipped across her mouth until she pushed it back and tied it with leather. She thought of Drogo. She thought of the child who had been a promise for so long and then a wound. She thought of a throne that had been a word like a prayer and now felt like a word like a weapon. She thought of her brother and how he had wanted a crown because he thought it would keep his head from feeling empty. She thought of the way good men can be chains and bad men can be ladders and how she had no use any longer for either. She looked at the water until she could not see land and felt only the ship and the wind and the small claws that kept correcting themselves on the wood. Back in the Red Keep, there came a night when the king sent everyone away and called only for Lord Eddard and Ser Barristan and sat with them and a map. It was a map of Westeros as a boy remembers it. Bright colors and clear lines, the bumps of the mountains like the spines of a beast. Robert traced the line of the trident with a stub of charcoal. He felt the old pull, like a hound checking the leash, toward a kind of life where a man's weight and courage decided things, not his cunning. He felt the new pull, like a wound, toward the bed that waited at his back. "We will do this," he said, and the charcoal left dark on the river. "We will cut the city into a dozen pieces a Lannister blade cannot move through without being seen. We will put honest men, my men, at the gates. We will make ready to meet Stannis with an honor that befits a brother. We will send to the Tyrells and invite them to a feast when the realm has relieved itself of indigestion." And he hesitated, and in hesitating he betrayed the place where something had to be smuggled in. "We will send for the pyromancers." Ned's head came up sharply. Barristan said nothing, but every bit of white cloth on him seemed to stiffen. "I'll not have wildfire stacked under the city like a feast under a starving man," Ned said, too even for the word to seem like anything but a truth. "I'll not stack it," Robert replied, and discovered that he meant it. "I'll have them tell me what they know of fire, not as a weapon, as knowledge. If dragons breathe, there are men in that green tower who have spent their lives thinking about how fire lives. I don't trust them. I trust them to have obsession in place of sense." "You are not a maester," Ned said. "You are a king, and a king who ignores the men who have given their lives to a thing, even if that thing is madness, is a king who learns too slow." Robert shifted. His mouth quirked. "Madness made me king once, my friend. Or Rhaegar's madness, or his father's, or mine. Choose." Barristan's hand lifted and settled. He was thinking of a boy he had served, and of the smell of burned meat that no one spoke of in the same sentence as honor. "Wildfire is treacherous," he said at last. "So are queens," Robert answered. "So are men who smile too much and men who smile too little. So is a cup of wine. So is the ground under a boar." He closed his hand on the charcoal and felt it crumble a little, leaving a stain. "Bring me the men in green. I will hear what they say. I am alive. I will listen to every fool who might keep me so." The days thickened. Letters went west, letters went east. Men moved like slow chess. In the back rooms of potshops, people began to talk of dragons. They said the dragons were big as dogs already, that they had flown across the narrow sea and were headed for the king's landing privies out of a taste for excrement, that they were small as mice and had crawled into a doll's house to make a queen of a child. They said many things. It pleased them to say them, for to say such words made a man who lifted sacks all day feel he had lifted something else. The city learned the taste of its own cleverness again. Robert learned the taste of restraint. He found that he could make himself eat half as much as he wanted. He found he could drink only enough to remind his mouth that he had not forgotten the shape of a cup. He slept in little bits and woke from dreams that were less easily owned than the dreams of his youth. He dreamed once that he stood at the docks and a black thing slid up out of the water, and its head was a boar's head, and its eyes were Jesse's eyes, and its breath smelt of orange blossoms and wildfire both. He began to walk, one hand on Barristan's arm, down corridors he had not walked since he had been new in the keep and had not yet learned the trick of sending other men in his stead. He walked past a door and a girl's laugh came out under it, a fine tinkle like glass about to be broken. He walked past a window and the city's breath came up, cabbage and hot horse and people. He walked once at night to the great hall where the skulls had been and stood in the center and felt it, the absence. He did not regret taking them down. He did not entirely. But he felt the way absence can be a presence when it is big enough. When at last the grand pavilion on the far side of the Blackwater lifted like a bright hill and boat pennants came upriver like a flock of bright waterfowl, Ned came to Robert and said, "Stannis." Robert went to meet his brother. He wore a mail shirt under a doublet that had been built to flatter him when flattering had not been such an effort. He wore his crown because a man in a room with his brothers is a man or a king, and Robert had decided which he would be today. He walked down the steps with Barristan beside him, and the city watched him walk and saw that he did not look small. Stannis came without his wife. He came with a lean, salt-bitten prime of men, and a man with a smuggler's eyes and a fertile field's hands. He came like a straight line that had learned not to boast of it. He knelt because it was correct. Robert touched his head and then pulled him up and embraced him with care, and then too hard, and Stannis grunted and Robert laughed, and it hurt them both, and they both liked it because pain that is chosen is different. They went into the hall. They spoke. They did not speak of love. They spoke of numbers. They did not speak of dragons first. They spoke of gates. Later, when the candles had burned down to stubs, when Renly had not yet arrived and the Queen had not yet done anything outrageous, when the city seemed to hold its breath like a swimmer about to go down, Ned drew a line on the map and Stannis drew another and Robert drew a third, and they looked at them and found that for once they all liked the picture. Only then did Robert say, "In the east." Stannis pressed his mouth. "I have heard," he said. "You have heard a great deal," Robert retorted. "Say what you think. I find it helps me decide whether to narrow my eyes at you." Stannis's eyes were already narrowed from a lifetime of light. He had not asked for being shown in them. "A Targaryen with dragons is a business not to be left to rumor," he replied. "If she is what they say, the realm must answer. If she is not, the realm must answer too, but with different men." Ned's hand lay quiet on the table. "What would you do?" "Send a man I trust to see with his own eyes," Stannis said. He looked at Davos, who stood a little back and tried to look like he had no opinion. "Send 2. Send 3. Pay them more than they can be bought for. Promise them honor if they return and something stouter if they do not. Prepare the fleet to do what Fle. It's do. Prepare the lords to do what lords pretend not to like. Let the girl know we watch." Robert let out a breath that he had been holding since Varys had said the word. He looked at the map and saw not colors and lines but the world. He thought of a girl on a shore with something that was old on her shoulder. He thought of a court where boys became men by accident and then bled for it. He thought of the way the weight inside his ribs had become something he could carry while he spoke. He laid his hand on the table, on the place where the narrow sea lay like a piece of mirror in a painting. "We will watch," he said, "and we will not be a city that waits for fire to decide what it loves." The next day dawned bright, which was a ridiculous choice, because the day held in it so much that would have preferred cloud. Men ate and armed and laughed at things they would not remember. Littlefinger found sums that made him smile, and tigress women in silk found men who would pay to hear rumors that had just been born and had not yet learned to walk without falling. Somewhere under a clean sky on a ship that did not boast, Daenerys Targaryen stood with her feet braced and watched a gull try to steal a fish from the beak of another gull and then succeed by accident. And she laughed out loud, and her dragons lifted their heads as if called and opened their little mouths and let the wind in, and for a breath she knew what it was to be a thing the wind loved. She did not look west because west was a word, and words have a way of making promises men cannot keep. She looked at the seam of sea and sky until it was only a seam and not a border, and she whispered to Drogon a word that was old in her mouth and new in her life, and Drogon made a sound like a coal beginning to speak. Robert Baratheon, who had walked from a door that death had held open wider than it had any right, sat in a chair that had hurt more men than any sword in the 7 kingdoms, and laid his hand on its arm, and did not feel small. He felt only very awake. He felt the city breathing and the letters flying like black birds and the small knock of a heart that had decided not to give up yet. He felt the way a man feels when a hunt begins and the woods are full of the beasts of old stories. Not just boars and deer, but creatures that men tell their children they do not have to fear because they belong to other times. "Let them be born," he said to no one. "We were born too." He smiled. and when the smile split the corner of his mouth and made it bleed a little, he licked the blood and found it tasted like iron and like a promise he had not yet made and meant to keep. In the yard where the heat held to the flagstones even after dusk, Arya Stark skipped backward from a wooden blade that flashed like a fish. Syrio Farrell danced around her, light on the balls of his feet, hands alive as birds. "Again," he said, and while the word was gentle, it fell like a pebble that starts an avalanche. She lunged, missed, felt the breath laugh out of her as Syrio turned her weight against her and let her go stumbling. She hit the dusty boards with her palms, sprang up, hair sticking to her cheeks. She ought to have been angry. She wasn't. The anger that had fed her at the beginning had become something calmer. She liked how the world grew crisp when she listened. She liked how a man's shoulder could be a door, how a foot could be a hinge. "Cat," Syrio said, "you chase too hard. Look, let the thing you chase wish to be caught." "I don't want it to wish," she panted. "I want to catch it." "Then make it wish and then catch it," he said, eyes bright, as if he had given her a gift. He stepped closer and tapped her knuckles with the stick. "Soft. Waters are soft until stone learns what soft means." She nodded, lips pressed. He made her practice the same step 20 times until her ankle burned and the boards with their little iron splinters knew her feet. The city's clamor moved in soft, slow eddies beyond the walls. Somewhere in the keep a bell told the hour. When at last Syrio was content, and his contentment looked like everyone else's scrutiny, he touched his temple and left her with a little bow that was not really a bow. "Chase a cat," he told her, "or do not, but let the cat think it is the chaser." She went hunting. The keep had cats enough for 5 castles. Some were bold as thieves and would sit in archways as if a king's flags were cuffs of velvet meant to amuse them. Some were ghosts with eyes like lamps, seen only when a candle guttered. Arya loved the ghost cats best. She crept along the warm side of a corridor near the kitchens, slid under a table piled with lemons that smelled like a cut brightness, loosed air carefully from her mouth. A gray tabby with a torn ear looked at her, blinked, and decided not to be impressed. She followed it through a scullion door and down steps where the stones sweated, the air turning cool and damp and smelling of old wine and older stone. The cat flitted ahead like a thought just out of reach. She reached a landing where one torch burned without interest. A corridor yawned left. On the right, the wall was blind. The cat paused, sat, lifted a paw to clean its ear, and then slid into the left darkness with its tail writing commas on the air. Arya paused too. She had learned to listen. The torch said SSSH and the stones said hush. Somewhere beyond, a mouse thought its mouse thoughts. She took a step and the torchlight found a bronze face on the wall, green with age, a face with a round hole where the mouth should be. It was a queer thing, the kind of queer that made Arya's back prickle with curiosity rather than fear. She stood on tiptoe and peered into it. It was only dark. She stuck her hand in. The bronze was cold around her wrist. She felt nothing but air, and then, deeper in, the edge of something like the lip of a pipe. There were more of these faces, Syrio had said once, in the kind of voice that meant knowledge wore shoes when it had to. The Red Keep was a rabbit warren, he had said. Rabbits were not the only things that lived in warrens. She let her hand fall and moved on down the left-hand passage. It ran on, then bent like a knee around an unmarked angle, then fell in old steps into a deeper dark where light shied away. The cat had vanished, now a rumor. Arya kept going. She liked the way her feet began to find their own rhythm, the way a place could teach feet how to belong in it. The air grew cooler still, with a tang beneath it like iron rubbed with vinegar. The floor was slick in one place and her boots slipped and scraped. She caught herself with a hand on stone and felt the stone's rough tongue in her palm. The murmur reached her first, then words. Men's voices, 2 of them. One low and smooth as river water over old stones, the other rounder, with a smile in it even when it did not smile. She came soft, flat to the wall, and slid toward the bend where a sliver of light like a blade cut across the floor. She lay on her belly, the boards cool against her ribs, and brought her face inch by inch to a slit where mortar had forgotten its old compact with stone. 'Twas a near thing, said the rounder voice. Boars do not kill kings every day, no matter how poets would have it. The gods are not poets, the smoother voice replied. They do not work to meter, but they enjoy rhyme. I enjoy it when I plan it, the smile voice said, and I enjoy less when others compose stanzas while I am asleep. The girl lives. The dragons live by all accounts. The wolf has shown the stag the lion's cloak. Have I left any creatures out? You leave out the spider, the smooth voice said, amused. He is not much of a beast. He spins. He listens. He walks where men do not. Arya's blood ran cold and hot together. The first voice, the one weighted with smile, had a kind of softness she had heard only twice, once in the small council and once behind a screen where men had laughed like coin. Little finger. The second voice was Varys, though here in the dark it sounded different, like something that had slipped out of its own skin. Has our friend across the sea hurried? Asked Littlefinger. Illyrio has an appetite for swiftness when the table is laden. Our friend across the sea never hurries, Varys said. He moves like honey in winter, but he has ways, and one of his ways is to be waiting in the right place when wind arrives. Our little queenlet will not starve for want of a platter, nor drown for want of a cup, Littlefinger murmured. Before long the wine will come to her, and here what do we pour? The city thinks we pour wildfire. He clicked his tongue. There is so much talk of green jars in low rooms. The city has the gift of dreaming about its own fires, Varys said. It reassures them that when the worst comes, they will at least be the spectacle. Yet the king asked for pyromancers to speak, not to light. The hand tempers him. I should be grateful to Eddard Stark for a number of things if I were a different man than I am. If you were that different a man, Littlefinger said dryly, you would be a fool, which would be useful to me in a different way. As it stands, I am only modestly amused. The stag brings the sour brother to court and writes honeyed letters to the flowered one. The lioness has sent 2 cubs to sea, and the third paces the circle, keeping to the edge. The old knight holds the door like a pillar. Where is the crack? I am fond of cracks. Lions crack when hungry, Varys said, or when they believe someone means to steal their meal. Tywin Lannister will not be content to let matters arrange themselves. He will write a letter and another, and then one will be written on the point of a lance. He believes himself a man who does not write with lances because he employs others to wield them. The world delights to surprise such men. And what of the truth? Littlefinger said. Truth is not a lance. It is a draught that gives men a headache when they drink too much. Will the king pour it? Will he pour it into the cup of the faith and say, drink? The High Septon is a fat man with tender feet. He will spill. The king will pour, Varys answered. Eddard Stark will hold the cup, and Barristan Selmy will stand behind them, and Stannis will count the drops that fall and mark each on the bone of his jaw. If we are fortunate, Renly will laugh at the wrong moment to remind everyone he has teeth. I live for such moments, Littlefinger sighed, and for the look that passes between brothers when a throne sits between them like a woman too beautiful to share. Shall I tell you my fear, Spider? That the king will live long enough to make my work more difficult. I count it as a hope, Varys said. I would have him live. I do not delight in Jared hearts. If he lives, we have steps. If he dies, we have a tumble. There was movement, cloth whispering. And the girl with dragons, our other piece. We had planned to bring her along slow, with sweetness and talk of jewels. The world has cut our bread for us, and it is stale. Stale bread is best toasted. We will toast it. I do not like dragons, Littlefinger said. They have a way of making silver seem like tin. They have a way of making men brave who should be cautious and cautious who should be brave, Varys murmured. But you will enjoy their shadows. Shadows do such pretty things on the walls. Arya lay very still. The torch hissed. A drop of water fattened on the ceiling, fell, became part of the floor forever. The men moved on. Their words dwindled to shapes and then to nothing. She waited until the waiting became a wait, then slid back, palms dirty and her mouth pressed thin with the effort not to call out or run. She did run, Then, when the corridor turned familiar again and the air felt like air and not a secret, she ran until light slapped her face and stopped only when Sirio stood in front of her as if he had been poured there. "You chased a cat," he said mildly. "A spider," she said, breathless. "And a little finger." "Ah," he said, and his smile was like a thought that amused itself. "You have good game." Ned listened with his head bent, one hand cupped over the back of Arya's as if he could slow the words and catch any that might fall. When she finished, the silence in the solar was not the kind that wished to last. It was a silence that prepared. Varys denied nothing when Ned confronted him. He put a hand to his breast and widened his eyes and confessed the Red Keep's love for whispers and the way whispers made friends of men who would never share a cup. He named Illyrio as he always named him, with a shrug you could hang a secret on, and spoke of old plans made for new times that had turned out to be less new than men had hoped. Ned left him with the faint taste of silk in his mouth and a desire to scrape his tongue. He took Arya's small, fidgeting hand in his again when they stood in the Queen's ballroom, now empty but for two servants polishing a floor that had been a battlefield of shoes. "You will be careful," he said. "You will not drift into the walls again. If a wall looks like a door, it is not a door for you." "I like the doors," she muttered. "I know," he said, and could not help the half-smile. "So do wolves. So do foxes. So do hunters. I would rather you were none of these for a little while." She wrinkled her nose. He touched her hair. It sprang back like stubborn grass. He had meant to tell Sansa first that the betrothal would be unmade, to choose words like a mason choosing stones. But the day made its own choices. He told Sansa after Vesper when the light was kindest, and still it made her eyes drown. She tried to be poised. The effort was a worse wound than any cry. She curtsied as if to a queen and said she understood the needs of kingdoms, and then turned and walked away perfectly until the door hid her sudden hurry. Septa Mordane stood stiff as a prayer. Ned, who had led men into battle and through snows that cut a face, found himself painfully incompetent before girls' tears. Robert had no gift for it either. He bore Sansa's curtsy and bright voice like a blow he had not trained for. When she had gone, he sat a long while, his hand on the arms of the chair as if he were keeping himself from rising and doing something foolish to escape the room. "I would have liked to be a simple man," he said, surprising himself. "I would have liked to have been a smith who got too strong and hit his iron too hard." "You were a simple man," Ned said gently, "and then you were a king. Those things do not go in the same skin." The pyromancer came in green, of course. He had brows like hedgerows and a mouth that curled at the ends, as if it had tasted too much sweetness when young and could not now find its way back to salt. He called himself Haleen of the King's Pyromancers and bowed low, his sleeves smelling of some oil that made the nose think hard and then give up. "In former days," Haleen began, and Robert had to restrain his patience with both hands. Yet there were kernels in the old man's chaff. Wildfire, Haleen said, was a living thing in its own fashion. It liked heat and hated damp. It thickened when it slept and ran thin when laughter was near. No pardon, when handled with too much eagerness. It had moods. It had different humors depending on the oils used to keep it docile. And here Haleen looked almost childlike. There were tales among the alchemists' guild of Wildfire singing when Dragonfire was near, as wine will sing in the bowl of a glass when a finger is run around the rim. "Sing," Robert grunted. "What does a jar do when it sings?" "It wishes to be a song," Haleen said earnestly. "It wishes to become itself. We have not had occasion to test the old stories. It is not a thing a prudent man invites." "That is one word for it," Ned said dryly. "We will not pour your green piss in my city," Robert said. "But I will not be a fool. If men are to speak of Dragonfire again, I would have men who know how fire moves at my table. If you have a book, bring it. If you have an old man who remembers who taught his teacher's teacher, bring him. If you have only a habit of bowing and stories like bells, leave them at your door." Haleen bowed again, eyes bright with a fanatic's gratitude. He left smelling more strongly of oil. Ned watched the door close and then looked at Robert as if measuring him for a shirt that would not itch. "You are doing a dangerous thing," he said, "listening too much. And yet I mean to go on." Robert stretched carefully, feeling how the wound stitched him to the chair. "When I was young, I listened only to the blood in my head and the men who could drink with me. It made me a king. It made me a fool of a king more often than not. I will try a new vice for a time." "Caution is not a vice," Barristan murmured from his post. "Not when dragons are in the wind." Renly came with the smell of roses and the sound of trumpets that were more handsome than necessary. He made the city look younger by riding into it. Men waved as if he were the kind of lord who would hear a small joke and laugh. He kissed his brother's cheeks and made him wince, and Stannis watched with a face that would have been unreadable even to a skilled oniromancer. Loras Tyrell glittered at Renly's shoulder and bowed to the king, and his bow was better than most men's because he even made it look honest. Later, in the small heat of the solar, Renly put his hand on the back of a chair and spoke like a man sweeping crumbs from a table. "There are solutions that will make hearts glad," he said, "and there are solutions that will make them shut. You could have the former. I have brought a garden, brother." "I have a garden," Robert said. "It grows cabbages." "The Tyrells are not cabbages," Renly said, smiling. "They are, shall we say, herbs. Fragrant, useful. They bring bees. Bees make honey. Honey keeps the mouth sweet when biting truth." His eyes were bright with the pleasure of his own cleverness, which had not yet been tempered by sufficient blows. "You want me to marry your Rose," Robert said, very tired of the talk of marriages. "Or you want someone to marry her." "Who? Me? Your nephew? The boy?" He waved his hand, making a fog of the question of whose boy Joffrey was. "You see me stitched up like a partridge. Do I look like a man ready to marry? I have a queen. I must first unmake what has been made." Renly's charm paused like a dancer checking his step, then went on. "At least let them come to court," he coaxed. "A garden in the Red Keep would be a mercy. It smells too much of rust and old lies." "Let them come," Stannis said unexpectedly. "We will measure the measureless with their presence. And I will watch how you smile when you stand beside them." Renly glanced at him, startled. "And will you learn, sour brother, to stand beside anyone at all without looking like you wish to push them off a wall?" "I will stand beside the truth," Stannis said. "People may stand beside me if they wish." Loras and Barristan crossed blades for courtesy the afternoon the Tyrells sent their riders to water horses at the river. It was not quite a bout, not quite a dance. Loras moved like a bright drop of water slipping off a leaf. Barristan moved like a tree bending, and in the end, if there had been ends, the water would have run into the ground and the tree would have grown a little stronger for the drink. They smiled at each other when they stopped. Loras might have meant it. Barristan certainly did. Cersei watched from a balcony with her hair braided back so that the line of her neck was severe and lovely. Jaime stood behind her, one hand on the rail, the white of his cloak brie. GHT against the stone. "Do you plan to applaud the old man when he breaks his hip?" he asked idly. "I plan to watch," Cersei said, "and to remember who claps for whom." She tilted her head to catch a snatch of Renly's laugh. "They bring prettier men than us. It will not help them. This city is a great maw. It eats prettiness. It has eaten my life, and I am not so easily swallowed." "At least you make good meat," Jaime murmured, and she shot him a look that was part pleasure at his insolence and part calculation at how long such insolence would be safe. At night, by a candle that made a little world of light in a much larger dim, Jaime cleaned his sword. He liked the ritual of it. It kept his hands from making other kinds of trouble. He thought of Robert moving through the corridors like a man who had decided to live. It would have been simple a year ago to push, simple a month ago, simple the night the boar gave them the best chance they had had and the worst. He had not done it. The last time he had killed a king in a room lit by fire, the flames had seemed to look back at him and learn his name. He had no desire to teach fire how to call him again. "You are thinking of a throne," Cersei said, stepping out of the tunnel of shadow by the door as if she had been stitched from it. "I can tell. Your mouth goes crooked. My mouth goes crooked when I think of many things, he said. You are thinking of the old one, she said. If Stannis rides into this keep, he will have the old one scoured, leaving only the iron. He likes the taste of iron. Robert will let him. He is tired of being laughed at by spikes. He will sit on the stones of history and call that comfort. We will not sit there. Have you written to father? I have written to no one, Jaime said. I do not like to write. It is like being asked to fight with a feather. Father writes. He will write with lances soon. He will sail with them, Cersei said. He will take my children back into his mouth like lion cubs. I have sent 2 already. I watch the river every morning and wonder which ripple is a message that they have drowned. She looked at him, and for a moment the beauty stripped away to show a woman who had run too far in too tight shoes. If I must, I will take Joffrey from this city in a sack. You will not need a sack, Jaime said, grim. You have me, and my oath. The last word tasted odd. He had meant to mock it, but it had made a shape in his mouth and set like resin. In the forge behind a shop that had a sign showing a golden lion biting a steel bar, a boy stood with his hands on the anvil and looked at the small, fat man with the nice gloves who had come to buy nothing and then much. Gendry had never seen a lord he liked as much as the hammer he held. The little man with the gloves had an edge to his smile like a file. He had come with a tall, cold man whose eyes measured the room and found blades in it. The boy did as he was told. When he turned away, the tall man looked at him with a gentleness that seemed new to his face and old to his bones. Later, when Ned told Robert that he had found the boy again and the boy was sound and had a look in his eyes like iron remembering Robert made a noise that might have been a laugh if it had not been broken. Bring him, he said, not to call him son, to call him boy and give him a good meal and a dog that won't bite him. I will bring him, Ned said, and I will also send a letter to Tobo Mott telling him the king did not mean to take his apprentice out from under his nose without leaving a coin. Leave him too, Robert said, and smiled in a way that showed a tooth missing from a brawl 3 lives ago. I am a generous thief. Gendry came to the keep with a bundle of his things and eyes like bruises from sleep he had not had. The king looked him over and saw his own youth, not in feature but in a shape of stance, and impatience with rooms. He asked him about hammers and the boy lit. He asked him about horses and the boy dimmed. He asked if he had a mother he remembered. The boy said no, mouth tight around the half-truth, which was that he remembered a smell like soap and rain once, and a hand patting his head as if it had to be reminded to be kind. You will eat, Robert said, and you will work, and when I have done being stitched together, you will show me what your hammer knows. I can show you now, Gendry said before he could bite the words back. Ned's mouth twitched. Robert grinned. Later, he said, or else you'll show me on my head. Davos stood on Dragonstone's outer stairs, the sea throwing its salt breath at him, and watched his lord reading a second letter as if it had come to arrest him. You will go, Stannis said without looking up. I am going, Davos said. He had a sack at his feet that contained all the things a smuggler needs. The kind of coins that pass without splitting their faces the moment they are bitten, a knife that had cut more rope than throats, a shirt that had seen better die. He would take a small ship and hug the coasts and pretend to be what he had been and in truth still was. He would go to Lys first, where men knew things they should not and told them for prices they pretended to think fair. He would go to Myr if he had to Pentos if Wym offered a current, to Qohor if he were unlucky, to Volantis if the god wanted him baffled, perhaps farther, if rumor became a wind. Find her, Stannis said, finally looking at him. Find the truth. Bring it back. And if the truth is dragons? Davos asked quietly. Stannis's jaw moved like a knot being tightened. Then bring me a man who has seen them with his own eyes and has eyes worth trusting. And then we will count ships like a grocer counts coppers, and we will sharpen quarrels until they might pierce a scale. He hated the poetry of his own words. He hated that the world had become the sort of thing that made a sober man speak in pictures. Melisandre watched them both from a little distance, smiling as if she watched a hearth catching. You sail with a blessing, she told Davos. which made Davos want to spit and pretend it was into the sea and not at her. He did not spit. He was not a boy. He took his sack and went down to the harbor, where his ship waited, a modest little creature with a single sail that had been patched so often it looked like a monk's coat. He touched the mast the way pantomimes touch a friend's shoulder to make sure they still can. The High Septon sent an envoy with a chain of heavy gold and a breath that smelled of holy wine, to inquire delicately into the meaning of words like legitimate and wedlock and the book of lineages and the proper channels through which difficult truths might be laundered for public consumption. Robert met him kindly and told him that the realm would not be asked to swallow what the gods themselves would gag on. He did not say the word sin. He did not say the word punishment. He said only truth and ask and children and mercy, and the man with the gold chain wiped his brow 3 times and spoke of prayer with the confusion of a man who has lost his audience and must pretend he has not. Janos Slint bowed his heavy bow and swore his thick oath and dreamed of encomiums and annuities. He was told, with a smile from Littlefinger that showed too much white, that his men would be receiving a bonus from the crown for their loyal silence. The bag of coins had a comfortable weight. The hand that took it had hands of other men's blood with the cold washed off. Ned watched and did not say what he thought of buying the watch's love. Robert watched and did say it. Men who can be bought back, he said. If I cannot fill them with honor, I can at least stuff them with fear and coin in such measures that they are too full to run. They will run if the lion roars loud enough, Ned said. Then we will teach them to love a stag, Robert said, and managed to make the word ride like a jest even as it tired him. The raven came from the wall 2 mornings later. Its feet tangled a little in the string that had bound the message. Its eyes were bead bright, the mind behind them small and infinite both. The letter was in Lord Commander Jeor Mormont's hand, narrow and patient. It spoke of dead men walking and of tracks on snow that did not belong to men and of cold that kept secrets like a miser. Ned read it and his mouth went into that line that Sansa called a scowl and Arya called father thinking. He brought it to Robert, who read it twice and did not try to make a quip fit the news. "We will send men," Robert said. "We always say we will send men and then we do not. This time we will. Stannis." "My concern is with the truth at court," Stannis said reflexively, and then caught himself, because the North's business was a kingdom's business and the Wall was a place where words like concern became shabby. "We will send men. Crowns have been lost to stories told by old men in furs," Robert said, half to the window. "And save too. We will send men." He sat for a while after, looking at the map with its bright painter's lies, and found his eyes caught by the white top of the world and how empty it looked until a raven's scrawl made it a place again. The sea grew glass-slick the day before the ship that carried Daenerys Targaryen sighted a line of pale-colored towers standing beyond a curve of land like a chorus prepared to sing. The captain, who believed in 10 gods and 3 bad habits, crossed himself with 2 fingers when he saw the city in his spyglass. "Karth," he said to Yora in a low voice, as if speaking the name too loud would wake its vanity. "She loves to be looked at. She loves to be paid for the looking." Karth rose on its low peninsula with its 3 walls patterned like the robes of men who cannot afford to be plain. The outermost was modest, full of carvings worn soft by salt and wind. The second was painted with scenes of beasts blue as lapis and green as malachite and gold as generosity. The third was a lattice of white stone like the bones of a coral. Ships with eyes painted on their prows came and went as if the harbor were a dream a child had been careful not to crush by telling it too soon. The dragons scented new air and were restless. Drogon crept to the very tip of the rail and hissed at the city as if recognizing in it a rival love. Regal blinked, slow and solemn, and unfurled a wing the size of a big kite. The sailors gasped and touched amulets and tried to make their hands look like hands that were not touching amulets. They were met by a ship with men in bright sashes and girls with hair hung with small bells. The bells chimed disarmingly. The men's smiles had the flat sheen of lacquer. "Karth welcomes you," said a man whose robe was a garden and whose fingers were heavy with rings. And then he looked more closely at the girl standing straight with 2 small lizards coiled upon her like living brooches, and his words stumbled. Very quickly his smile became a smile with different meanings in it. "Karth welcomes you indeed," he said again, richer this time. I am Zaro Daxos, one of the 13. We will make arrangements for your comfort. He made arrangements. He made many. He made a small city of arrangements and invited Daenerys to dwell in it. The quarters offered her were a villa with a private fountain that tossed water up with the air of a thing accustomed to being admired. Yora walked its edges like a dog who had been given a new yard and was unconvinced by fences. Men and women came with eyes that could not stop looking at the dragons. Some smiled and some crossed themselves behind sleeves and some counted silently and then became either warmer or colder depending on whether 3 was a number that pleased or frightened them. The pureborn came with a proposal wrapped in words like antiquity and tradition. The Tourmaline Brotherhood sent a man whose hands smelled faintly of sugar, who had 3 rings in one ear and a heart full of trade winds. Zaro brought gifts like rain brings a story to a village. Slowly, then all at once. He named Daenerys my dearest little sister with a tenderness so practiced it became, for a moment, something like true kindness. He spoke of kings and queens as if they were commodities one could move if one bought enough carts. He spoke of a narrow passage between 2 green lands and how it could be widened with gold. He spoke of ships. He spoke of companions. He kept not speaking of marriage, which was the way clever men propose. Kaith appeared first as a rumor, then as a woman with eyes like wells and a mask like the night sky in winter. She stood in a colonnade where the sea summed itself up for a moment and then unsummed itself. You woke the old in the old way, she told Daenerys, her voice so even it seemed to step from stone to stone. Be wary of men who trade in locks. They love keys more than they love doors. I have few locks, Daenerys said, and fewer doors. You have many, Kaith said. You do not see them yet. To go west you must go east. To go forward you must go back. Others will counsel you otherwise. They will show you maps with lines like chains. She lifted a hand as if to touch a dragon. Viserion made a soft noise in his throat. Not quite a warning. Kaith's hand fell. Keep the sun on your left for a time, she said, and was gone. Yora hated and loved the city in the way men hate and love their own past. Tempted, it glittered. It made promises with cinnamon on its breath. He saw courtyards where men who had never seen battle pretended to understand power better than those who had bled for it. He saw silks that would have made northern ladies gasp with pleasure and discomfort. He saw the way Daenerys walked among these things without becoming them. It frightened him. It made him want to be better than a man he had been. At night, on a terrace where the air had cooled enough to remember that men needed to breathe, Daenerys stood with Drogon nestled at her throat and watched lights wink along the harbor. She thought of a house with a red door. She thought of a lemon tree and how its scent had made her believe in summers. She thought of a brother who had wanted crowns as if they were a cure for his empty bone. She thought of a crown that was a city and an island and a hall with skulls that laughed even when they were not there. She pressed her fingers lightly against Drogon's neck and felt the heat under his scales like a sleeping thought. We will grow, she said to him. We will not be bought small. In King's Landing, Sansa sat with Septa Mordain in a window seat and sewed a little spray of forget-me-nots on linen the color of watered milk and thought that she would never again be able to hear a lute without wanting to weep. The Septa spoke gently about virtue and patience and the way some stories took bends before they came out straight. The words might have helped if they had not been words Sansa already knew by heart. She made her stitches perfect and thought, traitor to her own fair heart, that she liked the Hound because he did not lie about how the world felt on the teeth. Sandor Clegane came when summoned, his ugly handsome face arranged in its usual boredom. He stood looking past her as if she were a shelf of jars in the kitchens. You cry too neat, he said without preamble. If you're going to cry, do it ugly. Otherwise men like me think you're playing a song. I am not crying, Sansa said with the soft ferocity of the truly offended. And if I were, it would not be for your amusement. Nothing is for my amusement, he said. That is how I live so long. Not so long as all that, she said, surprising herself. He looked at her then, properly, and something like a reluctant respect drew one corner of his mouth. You're not a fool by necessity, he said. Don't choose it for a husband. I do not choose husbands, she said. My father will. Your father is less of a fool than most, Sandor admitted. He has the face of a man who doesn't enjoy other people's jokes. You'll be safer for that. Not safe, he shrugged. No one is safe who's worth keeping alive. He left her with that ungentle blessing, and she, being cleverer than she had been last month, took it as comfort. Arya went to the yard the next morning and found Syrio already there, making his shadow dance with him. She told him that she had chosen not to be a rabbit today. Good, he said. Be a fish. Be a cat. Be a something that is not only one thing. He made her hold her breath until her chest lifted of its own accord and then made her cut the air. She went through the corridors after, not to chase a cat but to learn the steps of a floor. She avoided the bronze mouths. She avoided the places where the walls seemed to breathe. In a room where ledgers had made their nests and were not inclined to fly at a clap of hands, Littlefinger held a quill and smiled at Varys and thought of a thing he would sell for a fisherman's net. Certainty. He had more plans than he had fingers. The trouble with plans was that they made a man wish to admire himself while walking, and men who admired themselves while walking had a way of scuffing their shoes on someone else's step. Lord Varys, he said, letting the honorific ooze. When the rose arrives with his vases and his knickknacks, do we make a show of being pleased? We are pleased, Varys said mildly. We live by shows. Ah, but I like to pretend pleasure as if it were an art I invented, Littlefinger said. I do not enjoy crowds of pretenders. I prefer a private theater. You will have it, Varys said. The king will do the obvious things first. He will put a ring around the queen. He will take his bastards from their pots and put them on shelves where eyes will fall on them. He will write to lords who like to read their names in a king's hand. He will do these things because he is alive and means to remain so. And then he will face the thing men think cannot be faced because a song wrote it out of their world. Dragons, Littlefinger murmured. If ever there was an investment that promised high returns and high risk, they are it. I wonder if we can short them. Short them? Varys cocked his head, genuinely curious. What an interesting verb. It would be interesting to profit from the extinguishing of fire, Littlefinger said, and laid down the quill with the neatness of a man putting a blade to sleep. We should ask the alchemists to create a flame that writes contracts. You jest, Varys said, and smiled like a man blessed with a secret. Robert summoned Jaime to a small room with a low ceiling where salt streaked the stones on the seaward side and the window stuck half open. The air smelled like a ship left too long at dock. Barristan stood in the corner like a judgment no one had asked for and everyone expected. Jaime came with a posture that suggested he was not at all curious, which is how men show most curiosity. We will not dance around, Robert said. You know what has been shown to me. I do not require a confession. The gods require it. I am not the gods. Jaime's mouth tilted, not into a smile. You would be a better god than many men have had. You have a clever tongue, Robert said. It will do you better than it has done others very like you only because I do not wish to be a murderer today. You will stand your post. You will guard what I tell you to guard. You will step where I put your feet. If you move your feet where I do not put them, I will cut them off. Do you think it wise to keep a man you do not trust at your back? Jaime asked, something almost like admiration in it. He had never liked cautious men. He could respect a man who said, I know the hole, and I step over it. No, Robert said simply, but I think it necessary. If I throw you out the door, your father comes in through the window. If I let you stay, he must decide whether to praise you for your bowed head or chastise you for it. I enjoy making Tywin Lannister think. It gives him wrinkles. He grinned then, broadly enough to pull at his stitches and wince. Besides, there is honor's game to consider. I enjoy seeing whether a man can play it.
Guard me, Sir Jaime.
Guard your queen. Guard the city. But guard the realm. If I see you guard only your own, I will know I brought a serpent to bed. Jaime bowed a shade deeper than he had meant to. As you command, he said. Barristan's eyes did not so much soften as become less perfect stone. When Jaime had gone, Robert leaned back and exhaled. He looked at Barristan as if the old knight were a memory he had not quite earned. "What would you have done?" he asked. "I would have killed him long ago," Barristan said bluntly. "But I am not a king, and you might yet do better than killing." "Do not make me into a patient man," Robert said with a laugh he did not feel. "It ill becomes me." The days lengthened and then seemed to narrow, as if the sun itself had to squeeze through a gate every afternoon to enter the city again. Gossip had a mouthful of dragons and made much of them, spitting out seeds of tales wherever it could. A fishwife on the riverbank swore she had seen one circling by the moon, no bigger than a hawk but with a cry that made her forget her name. A boy on the street of Silk told anyone who would hand him a copper that the king had ordered the alchemists to build a large glass cage to keep a dragon like a fish so men could look at it. A tanner said the queen cried every night and got drunk in the mornings. A different tanner said the queen was made of iron and drank oil. Ned wrote and sent men and sent more. He moved his daughter's chambers, quietly and like a man arranging chairs before an unexpected storm. He asked Yoren of the Night's Watch, who came to the city smelling like wood smoke and cold, whether there were any in his new catch he might like to leave with a name rather than a number. Yoren squinted at him from under the thatch of eyebrows that had weather in them. "There's a bull-headed boy," he allowed, "like to swing at anything that sways. Name of Lami. And there's a tough little prickly stick of a girl wearing a cap too big who swears she's not a girl." He spat. "I can lose or keep." Ned nodded slowly. He did not move Arya. He thought of moving Sansa and did not. The trick with weather is not to pretend to predict it, but to know when to stay under shelter and when to run. Tywin Lannister's raven took 6 days to arrive because the man who carried it had chosen to sleep with a woman in stony September, who had hair like barley and a laugh that had convinced him that several hours could be made into one. The letter was thin, like its sender's patience. It spoke politely of slanders and injurious rumors and the way falsehood, if allowed to stand, became a kind of truth. It reminded the king of debts paid. Gold for wars, grain for garrisons, men for marches. It did not say my grandson. It said the realm deserves stability and the lion will have an accounting if his name is taken in vain. Robert read it and snorted and exhaled and read it again and then had it put under a jar on his desk as if it were an unusually fine beetle. "I will send him an accounting," Robert said. "That begins with the price of lies." "Be careful," Ned said. "He taught the realm to count." "I taught it to sing," Robert answered with a crooked mouth. "I will now teach it to be quiet for a time." At Karth, the 13 debated the proper cost of wonder over a feast where peacock's breasts were served with lavender honey and the pears were cut to look like fish. "The girl will become a knife if she is not carefully wrapped," one of them said. "Knives are useful. Knives are also losses waiting to happen." Zaro poured wine with a hand that had very soft skin. "Knives make cutters rich," he said pleasantly. "If a thing cannot be owned, one must settle for adjacency." They agreed to show her to the pureborn like a new perfume. They agreed to forbid her to bring the dragons to the market. They did not agree about anything else, which meant they had reached the usual kind of consensus. Daenerys accepted their protection with that precise, spare grace that made Yora put his hand over his heart when he was alone and wonder at himself. She did not grovel, which the Qartheen would have enjoyed. She did not preen, which they would have forgiven. She listened. She asked the right number of questions. She fed the dragons until their bellies were round as little gourds. She let them char strips of meat and laughed softly when they scorched her fingers. The city came to the villa with questions disguised as gifts and desires disguised as respect. She learned the names of streets and the names of people and which names ended in coins and which ended in knives. She learned she could sleep with 3 small warm weights on her at once and not quite forget the cold nights that had made her think she would never warm again. One evening Zaro brought a singer with a harp that had strings made of hair. He sang in a language she did not know, and though she did not know it, it made the hairs on her arms lift, which is one way the body has of saying yes. The singer, he called himself Belicho, finished and bowed and backed away, and Zaro smiled. "Songs draw maps better than maesters," he said. "They tell you where men think the world is. Here, My sweet little queen, the world presently thinks you are in the middle of it. It will not think so long. It cannot bear to have its map disturbed. If you wish to stand where you please on that map, you will need coin and ships and a coral that is beautiful enough for men to die in it. I have dragons, she said. She spoke without boasting. She merely named. Dragons are expensive, Zaro said cheerfully. They will eat and demand jewels and burn away your worst mistakes and your best friends. They will make men love you and hate you and want you and fear you. They will make men decide they know you when you do not yet know yourself. And they are babies. He lifted his glass. To babies, they ruin everything. They make everything possible. The next morning, a man in robes like a thunderhead tried to steal Regal with a basket and a length of chain. Ricardo broke his arm and the man howled and spilled bright beads on the tiles. He named the House of the Undying and the Warlocks as if naming would make him brave. Yora threw him out and Daenerys stood by the fountain and breathed in and breathed out and told herself she would not be moved by fear. She was moved. Then she took that movement and set it in her spine. We will leave, she said softly, and Yora nodded because the word was a good one. Even if it frightened him because leaving meant sea and men and the other kind of uncertainty that wore a crown and a red keep. Where? He asked. West, she said, like a woman tasting a sweet she had not had since childhood. Not yet, he said gently. Not without ships that are not borrowed. Not without a port that will sell to you when others would starve you because a lion whispers to them. Not without coin that does not belong to a man who will later ask for your heart. She looked toward the harbor. Drogon climbed higher along her arm until he could look where she looked. Then, she said, we go where the men who sell ships live. We will go to them until one of them sells to me because he is greedy and cannot help it, and then the others will sell because greed has a scent. To Pentos first, or to Mir if the wind says so. You will need a storm, Yora said, but a kind one. Back in King's Landing, a storm of the wrong kind arrived first. It was not rain that fell but news. Lord Renly had written to Highgarden with a poet's quill, while a courier with a soldier's patience waited for Stannis to give a terse nod and seal. Tywin had moved men in the west. Scouts came in thin, wind-chapped and full of dust, with tails of banners on the Gold Road and musters on the Mander. The Riverlands were prickled and prickling in answer to something not yet done but clearly intended. The Vale remained in its dreamy peevishness, content to imagine that the world would walk around it if it stood still enough and glared. The North watched. The North always watched. It watched now like a wolf who has not yet decided which deer to follow. Robert strengthened the city and found the work of strengthening oddly comforting. It was simple to count sacks and men and corals and hinges. He liked comparing lists with men who had dirt under their nails. He liked being told by an armorer that 50 helms would not be ready by moonrise because the man's apprentices were badly fed and their fingers were clumsy from hunger, and he liked saying, "Feed them," and seeing 50 helms as if he had made them with his own iron. He sent for Hora's Redwine's wine, and then for the Redwine's fleet, and then for sorry letters when he was told no fleet could come because the Lannisters would poison any wine that tried to cross their teeth. He sent for Garland Tyrell without sending for him, by speaking of him in the hearing of men who spoke in the hearing of others, and heard back that Garland had smiled in a courtyard as if the smile were not for anyone but himself and the sword in his hand. He found a new pleasure in walking the ramparts at night with Barristan at his side, the white sword talking more in these days than he had in whole months past. Barristan told him of the old days when dragons had been bones and then only bones and then finally no one's bones, of kings who had been mad and half mad and not mad at all, and how one could tell them only by watching what they did when no one clapped. He told Robert of Demon Blackfire and of the noise of a rebel's name when men loved it enough to die for it. He told Robert, very softly, of Rhaegar's children and how the memory of their blood on a wall had nothing to do with honor and everything to do with the kind of peace men choose when they are tired of war. Robert listened and did not drink, and when at last he went to bed, the sleep that came was thicker and less splintered than it had been since the boar. One afternoon, when the light slanted as if it had lost its way, Arya came upon her father in a door where he was speaking with a man she did not know, a man with a nose like a beak and a manner like a carefully tied package. The man left with a bow. Ned looked down at his daughter, and the corner of his mouth lifted against his will. "Do not chase cats," he said. "I won't," she said, truthful for once, because Sirio had told her today to be a fish, and she could not be a fish and a cat at once. She hesitated, then said, "There are faces in the walls." "I know," Ned said, so simply that she widened her eyes. "If you see a face, do not speak into it. Faces listen louder than mouths." "It listened to me," she blurted, and then bit her lip. "It ate my hand." He scooped her up. She was too big to be scooped, and yet he did it, and for a breath she was little again, and the world was a tent that contained only her father's smell of leather and horse. "Do not feed the walls," he murmured into her hair. "They get large when you do." Catelyn Stark would have told him he was spoiling the girl. Catelyn was not here. He had a letter from her that smelled faintly of campfire and rain, and told him things about a river and a dwarf and a sister who had built herself a mountain out of fear. He read it at night when the city slept and told himself that all this would not be for nothing, not even if it became messy, which it would. He put his fist on the table and kept it there until the desire to break something in the room went away. The first ship that brought Davos seaworth news had sails patched with different cloth so many times that it looked like a quilt. The captain had a mouthful of bad teeth and a good memory. "A girl," he said, squinting into the wind as if he could still see her through the air. "White hair like a hall washed with milk. Little lizards on her shoulders with eyes like coins you can't spend. Karth. She left as I came." "Where to?" "West," they said. "North after that. Any place that had ships." Davos thanked him and passed him a coin that did not bite back. He held the railing as his own ship leaned into the weather. Behind him, a boy he had brought to learn the sea and perhaps himself retched over the side and apologized in a voice that made Davos gentle. He had 5 sons and had lost at least 2, and for the others lived like a man holding a rope that had been burned in places. He thought of Stannis' face in the lamplight and how it looked then like a map of a city that had been raided and rebuilt and raided again. He thought of the Red Woman's eyes and how they never seemed to blink when a man thought they should, which meant perhaps they blinked only when men were not looking. He thought of dragons and of his own small, square hands and wondered what men were meant to do with wonders. He was not a praying man. He had the look of one only when he was at sea and alone at the helm with the night pressing in and the stars doing their real work, which was not to be pretty but to be useful. When he turned his ship toward Pentos, he did it as a man turns his face toward home, though Pentos was not home for anyone like him. It was a place where men remembered him as a smuggler and as a man who had stopped smuggling only because a lord had cut the last bones from his hand and in so doing had given him his true shape. He would find Illyrio if Illyrio wished to be found. Men who had kitchens like palaces but smelled faintly like fear were easily found if one knew where to sniff. Bells rang in the great September the day the High Septon announced that the faith would wait for the king's truth and then would hold the truth like a candle for all men to see by. In the crowd, men and women knelt and prayed and hoped for clarity, which is a thing no god ever grants unless one is careful to define it in advance. Outside, on the steps, a brawl broke out between 2 boys wearing lion badges and 2 boys wearing stags, and a Septon tried to pull them apart and was rewarded with a fist that did not see his cloth. The city had not yet learned how to bleed for the right reasons. It would. The day the first Tyrell mummers performed in a square off the Street of Sisters, a troop of Lannister men interrupted and performed their own song with sticks and red-painted masks, and the crowd laughed too loudly, as crowds do when they fear what laughter might cost them. That night a baker who had painted a stag over his door came out to find it scraped away and a lion pawing at the bare wood. He painted the stag again in the morning and dared the dawn to scold him. In the practice yard, Sansa stood where the shade lay in a narrow pool and watched Loras Tyrell show the boys how a lance can be a pen and a shield a page. She tried not to think about Joffrey. She failed. She thought about him so hard she convinced herself she was not thinking about him at all. Then she thought about songs in which men loved twice and the second love was the correct one and the first love had been only a lesson. The hound came and stood near her and did not look at her. "He rides as if he believes every eye on him has earned it," he said, neutral. "It may have," Sansa said, surprising herself again. Everyone likes to look at beautiful things. And then what? Sandor asked. And then we stop, she said. We do not, he said. We always look again. That is the trick. News arrived that the Tully banners had been called on a day when fish had leapt from the river as if to be counted. News arrived that a Lannister foraging party had burned a hamlet near the Mummers Ford, and the hamlet had not had a name even before it was cinders. News arrived that the Vale continued to consider whether to consider. News arrived that a man calling himself a prophet had predicted dragons would nest in the ruins of Summerhall within the month. Men who knew the map smiled at that. Summerhall was far and dragons were babies, and even dragons must be taught the road. Robert sent men to Summerhall anyway. He said it was to fetch relics he had left there long ago. A hunting spear, a flask he had not emptied. Ned knew it was because the word Summerhall made Robert think of Targaryens burning themselves in pursuit of prophecy, and of how sometimes men must look at the very place that makes their hands itch and say no. The men came back with a sack of acorns and a moldy banner and a story about a ghost with hair like smoke. Robert made a jest of it and hid the way his eyes had softened for a breath. The night before Davos reached Pentos, there was a brief, clean storm that took the top off the sea. He grinned into it like an old friend who had surprised him with a slap. In the city, a fat man with rings that had swallowed his fingers held a banquet for men who could be useful and did not recognize themselves as such. He talked about dragons as if they were cousins who had been expected years ago and had finally sent word of their arrival. He ate a fig with a sensuality that made his listeners either fascinated or embarrassed. He was exactly where Davos had hoped him to be. When Davos found Illyrio, it was at the edge of a courtyard where shadows melted wine-dark and a fountain expressed itself in a perpetual mumble. Illyrio smiled as if he had been waiting for just this moment and just this man. Lord Stannis, he said when Davos named himself and his master, always did appreciate truth, or perhaps he does not appreciate it so much as work with it because working with anything else disgusts him. I admire this quality. It makes one's life difficult. It makes one's work simple. Is it truth? Davos asked. That a girl with dragons came to Qarth and left with all her skins and all her scales and no rings through her nose for Qarthine fingers to pull? Illyrio chuckled, and it was a pleasant sound if you did not think too much about why it was pleasant. Truth, he said, and truth that she goes west with men who love her and men who love the idea of her and a few who love only what they imagine they can sell of her. She will need coin and ships and someone to tell her the time when men pretend time is a thing made of admiration. She will find some of these, perhaps all, perhaps not. Will you sell to her? Davos asked bluntly. Illyrio spread his hands. I will sell to anyone who pays me with interest and does not kill me. I will give to those who will someday pay me even if they do not think they will. I am a generous man in the way the world rewards. He leaned forward. His eyes were bright, not with fanaticism but with the delight of a man whose game has added a new piece. Tell your lord that truth is my stock. Tell him that if he wishes to buy it, he must use a coin other than disdain. Davos left with the taste of lamp oil in his nose and the sense that he had touched something that would stain him a little. He sent ravens, and then another raven because one raven is lonely and lonely ravens are superstitious. He steered his ship north by west, hugging coasts that had islands like teeth. He thought of dragons flying ahead of him, their bellies low to the water, and told himself he should learn how a man shoots a thing that is not a gull and not a god. By the time the first leaves in the Kingswood had turned a touch dusty, a caravan with green and gold pennons rolled up. The Rose rode to the city and brought in ladies who smelled like summer kitchens and men who smiled as if smiling were a way of easing a sword in and out of a scabbard. Marjorie Tyrell entered the Red Keep with a courtesy that was so flawless it ceased to be courtesy and became, somehow, presence. She curtsied to the Queen without looking too long at her, curtsied to the King with tears like dew in her eyes, curtsied to Sansa as if she had known her from a dream, curtsied to Arya as if the girl were a small wild animal she wished not to startle. Sansa looked at Marjorie and was struck dumb by the thought that the songs had not lied quite as much as she thought. Arya looked at Marjorie and was struck by the desire to see whether the lace at the woman's elbow would tear if you pulled it hard. Loras and the Hound traded words that were almost polite, and men who loved fights for the way they made blood and reputation both shout leaned forward without meaning to. Renly walked between his garden and his brothers like a man who knows he has stepped into a tapestry and is trying not to snag on anything. Stannis counted the Tyrell men with his eyes. He did not hate them. He did not trust pleasure that came with its own scent. Robert watched all of it and then, when it became too much like a feast and too little like a war council, excused himself and went to the yard where the boys were training with wooden swords. Gendry looked up at him and smiled without knowing he had, because the sight of the king watching him fight made him feel tall. Robert watched him and felt a pang that was not regret and not pride, but some crooked mixture that men use when they have more children than names for them. He signaled to the master-at-arms and took a stick and faced Gendry. "Hit me," he said. The boy did. He swung hard as a boy will and telegraphed everything and still struck Robert across the wrist because Robert's body remembered the dance and accommodated the boy without pity. Robert laughed at the sting, a good sound that made even the master of coin look up in his counts and feel oddly comforted without knowing why. They went at it for 3 minutes that felt longer, and when they stopped, Robert put his big hand on the boy's shoulder and squeezed. "Eat more," he said, "and do not ask permission to breathe." At dusk, when the sky was the color of old peaches, Varys went down into the black halls and spoke through a mouth in the wall. The voice that answered him belonged to a man wearing a different name in every city he visited. They spoke of ships and of routes and of docks that would be quiet if gold fell on them. They spoke of lodgings in White Harbor that might be warm without being seen. They spoke of a road in the west that would be unsafe for months to come. They did not speak of loyalty. Loyalty belonged on tapestries and in oaths recited by candles, not in tunnels where men smelled like fear and tallow. Barristan Selmy wrote a letter in a hand that had penned vows and lists of dead and sometimes notes for songs that never got sung. He addressed it to a lady he would never see again and wrote that the king he served had decided, at last, to be a better king than the boy he had been. He did not send it. He folded it and put it under the white cloak he would wear to his grave. Cersei stood at a window and watched the river and told herself a story in which she outlived all these men and walked the halls of Casterly Rock with a goblet of red wine and a robe of heavy gold. And in the story she was still young. She turned from the window and called for her maid. "Bring me blue," she said, "and the diamonds that look like tears. I will not wear mourning for what has not died." In the villa that Xaro had given and now wanted back in the by and by because that is how gifts are, Daenerys trimmed her hair with a knife she had sharpened herself. The curls fell like shed skins. Drogon made a curious chuff and tilted his head. She looked at herself in a polished plate and saw a girl and a queen and a widow and a traveler and a mother and a child. She tied her hair again with leather and went to the harbor, where Yora had found a ship called the Laughing Sister that would take them to Pentos so long as no one laughed their way into trouble. The captain had 3 gold teeth and a scar through one eyebrow that gave his face an expression of perpetual skepticism. He bowed to the dragons as if to little gods he did not dare offend and did not dare reverence. When the ropes were cast off, the ship moved like a thought that has finally found words. Karth fell behind them in a glitter of white and green. Xaro stood on a balcony in a robe that had cost the lives of a nestful of silk moths and waved with theatrical sadness. Kaith stood in shadow without moving. Daenerys did not wave at either of them. She stood with her hands on the rail and watched the seam between sea and sky and felt the little claws at her shoulders and decided that she would teach them to fish and then to hunt other things, and then to fly where they liked and come back when she called because love, not leash, would bring them. Winds shifted. Men shifted with them. Letters crossed in the air like swallows of different flocks. The city trembled and steadied and trembled again, as cities do when power changes its way of sitting in a chair. Robert woke each morning surprised to find he was still breathing and each night surprised to find that breathing had become, again, a thing he wanted to do. When the first rumor came that Tywin Lannister himself had left Casterly Rock and was on the march, Littlefinger smiled as if someone had told him a lovely joke. Varys sighed as if someone had told him a sad truth. Renly frowned as if someone had told him that a feast had been moved to a different room, and Stannis said only, "Good," and began to lay out counters on a map with the bloodless joy of a man who finally holds tools he trusts. Ned went to the Godswood that night, which in King's Landing was a wrong thing. A lack of weirwood made it a garden that pretended. He knelt anyway beneath the alien oaks and the smooth, polite willows and asked the old gods of the river and the new gods of the city and any god who might be listening in the cracks whether honor could be made into a bridge without becoming a gallows. He sat in the silence after his own prayer and thought he heard something in it. Not quite a voice, more like the feeling of a voice passing. He rose and went to his king and said, "We should strike first." And Robert, who had been wondering whether he had the right to want that, felt a grin spread across his face like a map of a country he had thought lost. "Yes," he said simply, and the word rode out into the night and made a little banner of itself. And in the harbor the wind shifted so that ships strained at their ropes in a new direction. And on a far sea a girl with dragons felt something in her bones like a change in weather and did not know yet whether to call it enemy or friend. The morning smelt of steel, not the sharp smell of a fresh blade, but the older scent of iron that has remembered many hands. Robert woke before the light had decided what color it would be and lay listening to the small, workmanlike sounds of a keep at dawn. Scullions dragging pails, a door that had always dragged its lower edge across the rushes and would never be planed properly. The cough of a man who slept in armor because that is what peace demanded now and then called prudence. His wound spoke in a muted voice when he rose. He greeted it under his breath as a man might greet a stubborn mule at the start of a long road. He ate bread with salt rubbed into it and drank small beer that had been brewed right here in the city, honest and a touch sour. When Barristan came to him, white as a cloud that had learned purpose, Robert was already dressed. The doublet had been cut to flatter a bulk he no longer trusted. The mail beneath it did not flatter anything, and for that he liked it. "It is time," Barristan said simply. "It was time 11 years ago," Robert answered, fastening the last tie with fingers that had broken many things and, for once, did not wish to break this day. "Now we see whether the years have learned to listen." The great hall was a throat that morning, waiting to swallow and to shout. Light spilled through high, narrow windows and turned dust to a visible thing men could see and pretend thereby to measure the world. The banners hung a little motionless. The small folk admitted to the back craned and tried to look like wall stones. The lords arrayed along the steps did not have to try. Faces. The smooth, sweet handsomeness of Renly. The iron filings gathered into a jaw called Stannis. Tyrell green where it pleased, gold where it pleased. The High Septon had put on dignity that weighed his shoulders more than the chain of his office did, and his sandals peeped beneath his robe like shy animals. Pycelle stood near him and smelt of memory. Littlefinger had found a place where the light touched his cheek just so, as if to make the court look like his whorehouse's best room. Varys glistened faintly. He could not help it, like a polished fruit in summer heat. Cersei came with her lions, her hair a sermon on gold. Joffrey came beside her, head high, chin tight, eyes blank as bright water that has been skimmed free of leaves. Sansa faltered and did not falter as she took a place near the queen. Her hands wanted to twist. They did not. Arya shut her mouth against a laugh she had not meant. Sirio's voice lived in her ankles, telling them not to cross, not to trip, to be ready to spring for a ladder none of these people would recognize. Tommen and Myrcella were not there. The absence had sharpened itself, become a shape people were careful not to look at in case it asked to be named. Robert took the throne not as a conqueror leaping into his old seat, nor as a man being dragged back to a bad chair at dinner, but as a man who understands that chairs are one of the ways men are destroyed and saved. He let the iron needle him, not in public, that would be folly, but privately under the leather and the cloth, a prickle here, there. He could smell it, old blood in a forge. He put his hands on the arms the way a swimmer might put his fingers on the lip of a pool before pushing off. Eddard Stark stood a half step forward from the line, as if he had advanced and then checked himself so that the law would not think he had got ahead of it. He held a book under his arm, and the book looked like a modest weapon in his hand. Barristan stood at Robert's right, a piece of architecture the hall would have fallen without. Jaime's White made a striking absence at the left. He had a post that could not be left, and yet somehow the hall had learned it could be. Robert's voice went out over the hall and surprised even him with its steadiness. He did not thunder. He did not need to. The hall had learned to hear him when he was young and had not forgotten the old trick. "We convene to set our house in order," he said, and not a breath wasted. "The realm is a house, not a field for any man's hunt. When a house is rotten, it begins in places it pleases no one to look. We will look." A susurrus ran the length of the hall, the cloth sound of thought. Cersei lifted her chin as if to better display the line of it. She could make defiance look like beauty when she chose. She chose now. "The hand will speak," Robert said. Ned did not bow. He was done with perfumed gestures. He opened the book at the page that had cut him first, and when he began, his voice was that of a man telling the names of the dead at a village funeral. Quiet, inexorable, not asking anything of the hearers but to stand still and understand that truth survived them all. He did not call the queen a name the hall wanted. He did not call the Kingslayer anything he had not been called already. He spoke only of ink and years and lines. He spoke of dark and gold, of the stubbornness of seed. He set the book aside when he had done. He did not lift it as if to strike someone with it. He had never believed in striking with books. "The faith," Robert said. The High Septon began to sweat. He did not like sweat. It muddled his dignity. He spoke of oaths and the sanctity of marriage and the condition of the realm as if it were a patient, and the way sometimes a patient must be told he has been poisoned, and how the telling must be done gently and thoroughly and in the presence of those who loved him best, and how, in such cases, the law is a physician who has the unpleasant duty of prescribing harsh herbs and making the patient drink. Cersei's lip curled. "The law does not prescribe herbs for kings," she said, and each word had been cut to fit her mouth perfectly. "The law does not prescribe anything for kings. Kings prescribe the law. Kings keep it," Stannis said, not loudly, not unkindly, as one might correct a misread figure on a tally. Renly's hands folded on the pommel of his sword. He watched everyone watching everyone, delighted and a little frightened, which is how men should be when standing near a precipice they were only now remembering they stood near. "Jaime Lannister," Robert called then, and the name did what names can do. It compelled. Jaime entered, white as a lie that has been told so long it believes itself. He came and stood in the place that had been measured for him by custom, not by love. His face did not move. Cersei's eyes moved for him. "You swore to guard the king," Robert said. "I did," Jaime answered. His voice was mild, and men who did not love him would call it insolent because a mild voice can cut as well as a hard one. "Then hear the king," Robert said. He had not planned to speak the next words. They emerged from him like a thing that had survived winter and found spring on its own. "The crown declares the king's children by the queen to be subject to inquiry by the faith and by the hand. The king declares his brother Stannis Baratheon to be heir and next in succession until and unless the faith and the law can prove otherwise. The king declares his daughter Sansa unbound from the betrothal that would have delivered her to a crown that might not be true." A breath, then many, went in. The hall did not exhale. Cersei stood as if a knife had just missed her, and she did not mean to give it the satisfaction of seeing her bleed. Joffrey made a sound like a boy making a man's sound. He stepped forward, and his voice was the voice of a boy who had learned to shout before he had learned to speak. "I am the prince. You are my ward," Robert said. He did not shout. "You are my ward as of this moment. You will be schooled. You will be taught by men who do not flatter you. You will learn to hold a sword and a cup and a tongue. You will go where I send you and you will speak when spoken to. You will obey." Cersei's breath came short. Her hand lifted and then fell. Her smile was a weapon she chose and held. "You choose a winter," she said. "Very well. Winter comes to us all. Some of us have lived there," Ned said, and earned himself a glance that was almost a smile from his king. The High Septon coughed and made a prayer that tried to be a bridge between worlds. Pycelle shifted and muttered something that could have been regrettable and could have been remarkable. Littlefinger was not smiling. That was how Ned knew he was smiling more than usual. Varys's lids lowered, and when he raised them, Something in his face had been set aside behind glass. Robert rose. He could feel the chair tug at him. He ignored it. "Cersei of House Lannister," he said, "you will be confined to your apartments under the watch of the Kingsguard and the City Watch, such men as the hand shall appoint, until the Faith concludes its inquiry. You will not be insulted. You will not be harmed. You will not leave. The children of your body shall be treated with gentleness. Any hand that is not gentle with them shall be taken at the wrist." Cersei inclined her head as if to a minor inconvenience at a banquet. Only her eyes betrayed the fury that rushed and hit and rushed back like the sea against a cliff. "And if I refuse?" she asked, almost sweetly. Robert looked at her for a long heartbeat. He had loved her once, with a love brewed of beauty and wine and the need to be flattered by a mirror that did not show him what he was. That love had long since been scattered like chaff, and what remained was a respect for her ferocity and a hatred for what it had been used for. "You will not refuse," he said. "You are not a fool." Joffrey took another breath and found he could not find the words he had intended to hit the hall with. Jaime's eyes had not left Robert's face. There was something almost like pleasure in them. A man likes to be told what he must do by someone who knows. It releases him from the burden of his own cleverness. "As you command," Jaime said, and the white cloth bent a shade. Barristan moved then, and the space between them filled with old oath and fresh steel. Cersei turned, and in turning she became to the hall again a lioness, luxurious in her power, not a caged thing. She walked out between the white and the gold and the green as if she had chosen the path years ago and had always known one day she would take it. The hall breathed out. The sound was not a cheer and not a groan. It was the sound men make when they have not died today and might tomorrow. Robert sat again. He exhaled very slowly. The iron reminded him, thumbed him as if to say, that was not the end. When the court was dismissed, it did not truly dismiss. It poured into corridors like a stream newly released from a blocked path, finding eddies, making murmurs. Sansa found herself beside Marjorie Tyrell, who took her hand without ceremony and squeezed it with a pressure that could have been warning or comfort or both. "You did well," Marjorie said, as if a girl had done something more than stand and be. "You will need to do well again." Sansa nodded because sometimes a nod was the only thing a body could do and still be thought composed. Arya watched the men's swordship in talk and thought of where knees go. Renly went to his brother and kissed him again, this time with more bone to it, less pageant. "Well," he said, with a lightness he had chosen and might not yet be able to maintain, "we have a stage. We have a field," Stannis corrected. "You may pretend it is a stage if it helps you hold your tongue when you should. Sometimes a stage keeps men from lunging for one another when a field would invite it," Renly said. "I am in favor of stages." "Be in favor of walls and bread," Stannis said, "and men with good boots." Robert grunted and found he liked both. "Walls and bread and stages," he said. "We will have all. And boots." Afterward, in the solar, the heat lay on them like a blanket that had been dried too near the fire. Robert drained a cup of water and wanted wine and poured water again. "She'll not sit quietly," he said. "No," Ned agreed. "But we will have the Queen's wing close-guarded without making a spectacle of it. We will put Ser Barristan's men where they can be seen and the City Watch where they can be seen. We will keep the lions and the gold cloaks from rubbing their tempers together. We will take Pycelle's keys. We will change the servants. We will speak with the septas. And we will watch Littlefinger," Robert said. "And we will watch Varys," Stannis added. "And we will watch the man who salts the fish," Renly said almost cheerfully. "If a city is a house, then every hinge squeaks." Barristan touched 2 fingers to his sword hilt and then let his hand fall. "We must tch ourselves," he said. "Pride makes a poor watchman." The City Watch took its orders from Janos Slint with a face he had been practicing. Honest, pleased, heavy. He had counted the weight of the coin left by the Master of Coin and the hand both and found that it balanced itself nicely with his desire to live long and be important. He instructed his men with the dignity a man acquires when his breath is mistaken for authority. "We are to be seen," he told them. "We are to be sober-eyed. We are to keep the queen's corridors quiet and the king's clear. We are to break no heads unless a head begs." His sergeants nodded like men who secretly enjoyed it when heads begged. Jaime took the first watch at the queen's door. Cersei did not speak to him at once. She had poured herself wine, then let it sit untouched until the rim grew a faint ring of stickiness. When at last she spoke, her voice was effortlessly unkind. "Did you enjoy your bow?" "It was honest work," he said. "Honest?" she repeated, as if tasting an unfamiliar spice. "We are to be honest now. Make a list of our honesty and send it to Father." He did not rise to the bait. "I will send him a list of what is needed," he said. "Men, grain, patience, perhaps your tongue." "You will not have it," she said, smiling, and there was almost love in the way she denied him the thing he asked for in jest and in truth. She went to the window and looked at the river. The current was strong, making its small changes. "He will come," she said. "He will write first because he likes to imagine the world still moves where he points. And then he will come because the world does not." "Good," Jaime said. "A war with rules," he thought. "A war with fathers and banners and speeches." He favored such wars. They made sense when nothing else did. On the Rose Road, the Tyrell wagons gave off the smell of fresh-cut straw and rosewater, a combination that set teeth on edge after a while. In their pavilion that evening, Marjorie listened as her grandmother's absence spoke loud. Olenna had not come. She was wise enough to let younger hands be seen, but her letters had. Marjorie read them by lamplight, smiling at a turn of phrase that had teased her when she was small and comforted her now that she played with wolves and lions in their caves. Loras came in, hair sweat curls at his neck, smelling of horse and the iron tang of a practiced blade. He saw the letter and shrugged in a way that was both affection and exasperation. "She tells you to smile," he guessed. "She tells me to use my teeth too," Marjorie said, amused. "Smiles are wasted if they cannot bite." "Be careful," Loras said quietly. She looked up at him and grew serious. "I am careful," she said. "I am also not afraid to be uncareful when the moment must be had." In the Vale, the Ares high air made Tyrion Lannister cough at night until Bronn, lying on a pallet with a blade within lazy reach of his hand, told him to drink more of the sour wine and fewer jokes. "My jokes keep me warm," Tyrion replied hoarsely. "Then get warmer by leaving," Bronn said, and the next morning they left. A small party with reluctant leave and less honor than a stable boy. Tyrion had won his way out with wit and coin and the kind of luck that makes enemies become impatient. Lisa Arryn had grown dissatisfied with the game when it stopped making her look clever before her own people, and had sent him down the mountain like a stone she had grown tired of turning over in her hand. They rode careful along goat tracks and less careful in the lowlands. Tyrion's head swam sometimes with the kind of sleep that falls on a man in daylight when the world will not let him have his night. He had, along the way, acquired a trio of mountain men who liked his coin and perhaps his audacity. They were silent where they should not have been and loud where he prayed they would be silent, and they looked at the world as if it held more meat than it usually did for men like them. He told himself they were assets. He told himself this often enough that it began to be true. When word reached him through a plump innkeeper with a false laugh that the king had declared the queen confined, Tyrion sat a long time and drank a mug of ale that had been left too long in the cask. "Father must be chewing his own wealth," he said at last. "He'll spit something," Bronn said. "Men like him always do." "He will spit an army," Tyrion said. "We shall go and pick our teeth with its lances." They turned toward the west, and the road grew rough with rumor and ash as they neared the riverlands. Villages had been burned by someone's orders and someone's pleasure. Men with the flayed man on their shields rode east and then west, as if confused. Houses with trout carved over the lintel had shut their doors to Lannisters and to men who might be Lannisters and to men who might be against Lannisters. Tyrion bought bread with a ruby and worried that bread should cost so much. He laughed at himself. He had never before in his life thought bread dear. In Lys, Davos found Salador-san in the back room of a house that had successfully held a dozen different businesses without ever changing the smell of cloves and old fish that lived in its beams. Salador rose like a man whose belly made standing seem a good deed. His robe was expensive, an advertisement, his smile honest in its roguery. "Davos," he cried, and embraced him as if they had never quarreled over shares and sales. "You come to me at last because the world is ending and you would like to be upon it when it ends." "I come because my lord asks," Davos said. "And because the world is beginning and he'd like a hand to shape it." Salador laughed, delighted. "We will take both fees," he said. "I have ships. I have men who can pretend to be sailors when there are women to impress. I have courage in the mornings and caution in the afternoons. What does your lord pay?" Davos told him. Salador shook his head at the numbers, then at his own head, then at the way men with numbers could be made to agree to different numbers depending on how the sun lay. "We will go to Dragonstone," he said. "We will eat your sour bread and your salt fish, and we will teach your lord to love my laughter." "You will bring your ships to the king," Davos said. "I will bring my ships to myself," Salador corrected cheerfully. "And if your king is on the quay with a smile, I will tie them to his smile." He knew because he knew everything about the girl with dragons. He had a friend with a friend in Karth who had watched a small black thing step onto a rail and look at the sea like it wanted to drink it. "I do not like things that fly and burn," he told Davos. "They cannot be counted like coins, but I like the way men believe in them. Belief is the best wind." In Pentos, Illyrio Mopatis received Daenerys in robes that had devoured many cocoons and a smile that had learned to live easily with disappointment and thus to disguise it. He called her princess, and then, when he saw her face, and the small black creature crawl from her shoulder to his, he called her Khaleesi, and then, more softly, "My queen." Her eyes did not soften. She sat with one ankle crossed over the other like a woman who had been born to waiting rooms and knew how to punish a man with patience. "You sent me to a horseman," she said. "I learned to ride. I learned to walk through fire. I learned to give birth to ash." Illyrio tilted his head as if to admire a vase. "You learned to live," he said. "I did not send you to die. I sent you to become. It is one of my few talents, discovering what people can become and placing them near the thing that will make them become it." "You would place me," she said. "You would place me rather than ask me where I wish to stand." He laughed. It was not unkind. "I would place you where it will be easiest for you to stand when you have told me where you wish to stand. I know where the wood is rotten in Westeros. I know which beams will bear. I will not pretend the house is not yours to enter. I will merely hire a carpenter." "Hire a navy," Yora murmured from his place at her side. Illyrio smiled at him with the delight of a host who has found a guest who will not be dazzled and thus must be entertained properly. "I am hiring several," he said. "Some men will not hire to me if they think I will sell them for double at dawn. They will hire to you. We will make them think it was their idea. They bargained." It was a dance and not an argument. They traded courtesies with the deftness of knives scratching a soft board. When at last she left his estate with its gardens that smelt of oranges and thick-bellied fish at the pool's lip, she had in her purse more coin than she had upon entering, and, in her mind, the names of 3 captains who could be made to carry dragons if they were paid enough and told it meant they were men of the new age. She did not trust Illyrio because she had learned to cultivate her mistrust like a useful herb, but she did not spurn him, because even poison can be a medicine when admitted carefully. At night she slept in a house of her own choosing, mean by Pentoshi standards, and dreamed of a red door. Drogon woke her with a hiss when she cried out once. She soothed him, crooning in a language no one had taught her. In the morning she went down to the shore and held meat over the water and made the dragons leap and take it in midair. Their wings beat her hair about her face. She laughed. Sailors stopped to watch with the awe men give to spectacles that may one day burn their houses and today amuse their children. In the red keep a boy with yellow hair and a face that had been trained to mask itself sat with a master-at-arms and had a wooden sword placed in his hand. "You will stand so," the man said, moving Joffrey's feet, "and you will keep your eyes on the chest, not the blade." "I am a prince," Joffrey said. "You are a student." the man answered, not cruelly. All men are students who live. He did not add long enough, though it hung in the air like a scent. Sansa walked the queen's corridor with a tray she had insisted on delivering herself, because sometimes a girl must do a thing with her hands to remind them they belong to her. The guards at the door looked at her with expressions that were not unkind and not warm. A guard's kindness must be saved for the right times. She entered and curtsied and felt the queen's glance touch her like the edge of a knife. "Lady Sansa," Cersei said, "you must be cleverer than this." "I am not clever," Sansa said softly, "but I am obedient." "Then be obedient to yourself," Cersei said, and for a heartbeat her voice almost broke on something like pity. "Do not let men write your song. Do not let them decide that you are made of reeds." "I am made of snow," Sansa said before she could think, and the queen's mouth tilted, impressed despite herself. "Snow melts," Cersei said. "Not in winter," Sansa murmured, and then wished she had not, because the queen laughed, and the laughter made the room smaller. Arya stole an apple and ate it slowly on the roof while King's Landing gave up its midday heat to the flies. She watched men bring in barrels of iron banded something to the cellars by the river and wondered if they were ale or trouble. She watched two boys fight with sticks and then stop when the hound came by. Sandor glanced up and saw her and did not call her down. He had seen cats at that height before. They fell when they did not belong there. This one belonged there now. Syrio had found her. He had not saved her. People are not saved, he thought, and then dishonored his own cynicism by hoping he was wrong. Eddard Stark met with the High Septon, and with a man whose robes were newer than his wisdom, and with a woman with an expression like a door left ajar. They spoke of inquiries and affidavits and the way to question a queen without making the questioning into a sermon men would like to shout through the streets. The woman with the ajar look suggested a panel. The High Septon wanted candles and confessionals. Ned wanted truth. In the end, they agreed to speak with the maids who had brushed the queen's hair and the midwives who had measured the months. They agreed to speak with stable boys and singers and with the lord in white who had stood beside the queen and would not answer. They agreed to speak with the book that had suffered their eyes already. They agreed to speak with the walls, which meant Varys. The spider came as invited, and when he sat, he made himself small, which is one way to be large. "I will tell you what I can tell you," he said. "I will not tell you what will break men more than it will help them. The realm is a fragile boat, my lords. You may patch one side and push your fingers through the other without intending." "Tell me this," Ned said. "If a king asks you a question about his own wife, are you the one to decide what breaks him?" Varys looked down at hands that had been made soft and clever by a life spent keeping them away from swords. "No," he said simply, "but I am the one who decides what breaks other men when the king's heart is mended." He lifted his eyes. "Forgive me. I was made for this. I am not proud of it." Tywin Lannister's army moved like a calculation, precise, quiet, remorseless. He read the king's letters with a face that did not wear surprise easily. He wrote back with the courtesy a general pays an enemy he respects, and then blew his nose and told his captains that the Tullus must be engaged where they were strongest so that they could be made weakest. He told his men that the Riverlands had to be taught that rivers are not borders. They are roads. He sent Ser Gregor Clegane like a torch ahead of the main host, and the villages saw him coming and learned the old equation again. Where a lion is, the thatch burns. At Harrenhal, a place that had been too big for men even while dragons still kept it warm, men began already to make cook fires and wager on which lord would first lose his temper. They told one another that the king lived and learned. They did not yet know what that would cost them. The old Blackstones listened. They had listened to worse and learned nothing from it, which is a kind of wisdom. Jeor Mormont at the wall took the king's letter and read it with his mouth pursed and then, without ceremony, banged on the table with 2 fingers and called for men. "We will go," he said. "We have been promising to go and failing to do it. We will go into the woods before they come out of it." He looked at Jon Snow, who stood straighter beneath that look than he had the day before, and said, "You will hold the practice yard while I am gone there. You will not think this makes you a man because a title never made a man." Jon nodded, and the nod was truer than any words he could have found. because he had learned to listen to the things men say when they are tired and therefore honest. Samwell Tarly scribbled lists and tried not to spill ink and tried not to imagine what the cold beyond the wall would be when it had decided to stop playing at being cold and begin. He wrote to his father and did not send the letter. He wrote again. He burned that one. In the city, Helene of the Pyromancers came with two old men whose ears had hair like frost and whose eyes had been glazed over by years of watching green flames talk to each other. He brought a small glass ampulla of wildfire the size of a child's thumb and set it on the broad stone of a hearth. Robert leaned forward, fascinated in spite of himself. Helene explained again that it had moods. He held his hands above the ampulla and chanted something that might have been a recipe and might have been a prayer. The glass clouded, then cleared. A breath of heat touched the king's face without fire to carry it. "This is not a toy," Helene said fervently. "Nor a weapon," Ned said. "It is a teacher," Helene said, surprising them both. "It teaches humility to men who think fire is their servant. It reminds them that fire is a god." He smiled then, thin and satisfied. "Nothing teaches humility like that." Robert had a sudden memory of himself as a boy, lighting a torch in Storm's End and feeling the flame catch and for a moment fearing and loving the way it leapt. He grunted. "I will not be taught by green jars," he said, "but I will not be a lazy student of war." They dismissed the pyromancers with courtesy. Ned looked after them and shook his head with a faint smile he did not know he wore. "When the world grows strange," he murmured, "it throws up strange men." "They do not seem so strange if you drink with them," Robert said, and then sighed because he could not even pretend to love wine right now without making Barristan look at him like a disappointed father. Letters became birds and birds became gossip and gossip became order. The riverlands rose. The west rippled. The reach smiled and stayed where it was good to grow food and rumors both. The north placed a hand on the pommel of a sword and did not draw. The vale shut its eyes and did not sleep. The Stormlands sent word that men were ready and had never stopped being ready. The sea breathed against Dragonstone and counted ships like beads. One night, when the moon settled low as if it had come down to listen to men's whispers itself, Robert and Ned went up to the outer curtain and stood shoulder to shoulder like boys on a wall, their boots in old pigeon droppings. The city lay around them like a beast that, for once, slept. "Do you remember," Robert said, "the smell of the trident in storm weather?" "I remember," Ned said. "I remember thinking I was the hammer and the world was the anvil," Robert said. "I remember thinking if I hit hard enough, the world would take my shape." "It took a shape," Ned said. "We are living in it." Robert laughed. "Lo, I will not die," he said suddenly, fiercely, with the childishness of the old that so often resembles the childishness of the young. "Not before we have made this right. Not before I have seen a dragon with my own eyes and called it a lizard. Not before I have made a boy into a man who will not shame himself, whether he wears my crown or someone else's name." Ned said nothing. He did not trust words to bear the weight of vows at night. He put his hand on Robert's arm for a breath and then let it fall. In Pentos, Daenerys took a ship called the Bride of Calm to the Myrish coast to speak with a man who spoke for a company of Selsails and liked to call himself captain when he was not one. He had a beard that was plated with bits of blue glass and a habit of rubbing the dragon's skin with one finger when he thought she would not notice. She noticed. "You will not touch them again," she said conversationally when they had finished their talk and found a price both could live with. He did not ask why. He did not apologize. He bowed so low the beads in his beard clicked together, and later he told his lieutenant that he had felt himself brush against a fire too small to fear and too old to insult. A black-sailed galley with a carved woman on the prow whose mouth held a dagger nosed into Pentos 2 days after Daenerys left it. On its deck, Davos Seaworth scanned the keys with an old man's suspicion and a young man's curiosity. He found the Magister easily. Illyrio was always where men needed to find him. They spoke as men who have known one another's names through letters and the mouths of other men sometimes do, with risk and with civility. Davos asked again about the girl. Illyrio spread his hands and let a ring glint. "She goes to gather wind," he said. "The world has begun to want her." That is half the war. Wanting is not winning, Davos said. It is the only way winning begins, Illyrio replied. The other half is coin, and the third half is ships, and the fourth half is luck. She has three. 3 halves, Davos said, and smiled despite himself. My lord will be glad to know you are not a mathematician. Illyrio's laughter floated up to the rafters and made the pigeons shift and mutter. Tell your lord that if he plans to fight dragons, he must learn to love the men who fight for coin, he said. They are more reliable than those who fight for songs. Back in the Red Keep, a boy limped into the kitchens with a message and left with a heel of bread and a remark about the kitchen cat that had caught 3 mice in 1 hour. A woman with flour on her arm read the message and dried her hands carefully before running with it to a guard. The message passed like a hot coal from palm to palm. It said a ship had left the Blackwater mouth at midnight with no lanterns and men who spoke none of the city's language. It said the ship had a cargo not written on any tally. It said the Queen's windows were dark. Ned took the message to Robert, and together with Barristan they walked the Queen's corridor and stood outside the door and listened to a kind of silence that is earned, not given. Jaime opened the door before they knocked. He had the set look of a man who has not slept because he did not trust his body to keep him from doing something it would later resent. She is asleep, he said. She is not, Cersei said from the inner room, and came forward with a robe knotted tight and her hair loose and weapon enough in her bare face. Do you intend to make a habit of watching me sleep? She asked the king. Or shall we make the small courtesy of pretending we are civilized? Robert did not rise. He had wasted too many words, too many years on pretenses. If you intend to flee, he said, know that you will be stopped at the gates. If you intend to spirit Joffrey away, know that he will be stopped at the yard. If you intend to send knives into my bed, know that the men I have around me have survived nights worse than your anger. She smiled. I intend to live, she said. That is what we all intend, Robert answered. It is only that our methods differ. She turned away from him because she had said what she had come out to say. Leave me to my sleep, she commanded, as if this were her court still. She paused at the threshold. And teach your ward to lower his eyes when he should. He looks at me as if he has not decided whether to hate me yet. He is a boy. Let him grow into a man who can do either without looking like an actor. Robert did not answer. When the door had shut, he let out a breath that had lodged like a burr. She will try, he said simply. She already has, Barristan murmured, thinking of the ship with no lanterns. We will try to. After 3 days of open court and closed conference, the city's rhythms changed. Shops opened and shut more cautiously. Men who had worn lions took them off to scrub the pins and put them on again only when certain eyes were looking. Women who had gone to the market in pairs now went in threes and made a point of speaking loudly when they passed gold cloaks, to show they feared nothing and perhaps to ensure that they did not have to fear anything. The Red Keep had quieter hours and louder ones. Arya discovered staircases she had not known a week ago. Sansa discovered that Marjorie Tyrell knew the words to songs Sansa thought no one remembered. They sang them together softly over embroidery, and the sound made Septa Mordain weep quietly and turn away so as not to embarrass the girls with her age. Tywin's letters became harder to read because they wore courtesy like armor. He asked for proofs. He asked for names. He asked for mercy, which was the oddest word of all to leave his pen. Robert sent back the book of lineages copied by a careful scribe and a letter that said only, "Come." The raven that carried it flew straight because there were storms brewing and birds do not like to be torn out of the wind and thrown down in front of men and told to deliver bad news gracefully. A fortnight after Stannis' landing and Renly's roses, a band of men with the flayed man on their banners attempted to ride into the city by the King's Gate at dusk. They said they were in Lannister hire and had been sent to reinforce the Queen's honor guard, and the sergeant of the watch who stood there with 15 men and 3 tired dogs laughed until he could not feel his throat and told them that, in King's Landing, men did not put on a Northern Lord's sigil unless they meant to frighten or to steal. The men tried to do both. They had not accounted for Stannis' habit of putting numbers where they were needed. They had not accounted for Barristan's habit of walking. It was over quickly and mostly without death. but the blood on the cobbles taught anyone who needed it that the city's door would not be pushed in by sighs and gossip. That night, when the lamps in the windows by the river made a pattern that pleased only those who knew patterns might be lies, Renly found Loras amid a knot of men who wore green in their hearts and over it gold when it pleased them. "We will go back to High Garden for a time when this is settled," he said impulsively. "We will eat peaches. We will plant thorns," Loras said, kissing him quickly in a shadow shaped for quick kisses. "Then we will eat peaches when they have grown sweet enough to forgive us." Near the Blackwater's mouth, Davos stood on a pier beside Salador San and watched smaller vessels scud out past a darker line in the water that was a shoal the city's children knew by a different name than the city's pilots did. "Your king has angered the lions," Salador observed, as if commenting on the weather. "This is good. Lions must be angered to come down from their rocks." "They come down for meat," Davos said, "not for justice." "Justice is meat," Salador said comfortably. "To some, to others it is wine. We drink what we have." He looked toward the Red Keep. "Will your king pay me when we have done saving his city from dragons and lions and his own choices?" "He will," Davos said. "And if he does not, I will steal from him for you and tell him later and ask him to forgive me." "He will." Salador laughed and clapped him on the shoulder. "You are a better man than your god deserves," he said. "I say this as a priest of coin." In the Far East, a caravan of men who thought of themselves as merchants first and priests after them carried stories of a girl who fed fire and did not burn. In taverns in Tyrosh and Mir and Volantis, men told each other they had seen her. They had not. Some had seen a child with pale hair hold a lizard that had been painted. Some had seen a girl with an iron brazier who knew a few tricks with powders. One had seen Daenerys Targaryen herself at a distance and had not understood what he had seen. He had not been able to properly translate the feeling she woke in him into a story. It left him silent and drinking more carefully, and his wife noticed and loved him better for a week. At the wall, the first of the ranging parties brought back a bit of a man's sleeve and a story that made their own hands shake when they told it. Jeor Mormont nodded, as if the story had been told him long ago by a woman who had not liked him much and had patted his cheek anyway because he was a boy. He gave orders. He sent a raven to the king that said only, "It is worse than we feared. It is not yet as bad as it will be." He kept Jon and 3 others back from the first foray not because he doubted them but because a Lord Commander must never spend all his coin at the first merchant. Jon watched them go and felt himself grow up a little and wished he had not had to. In King's Landing, Catelyn Stark arrived at last with hair a little looser than it had been when she left Winterfell and a gait that had learned new ways to hurry and to stop. She embraced her husband in a corridor that had seen other embraces and did not honor them by keeping them secret. "You are too thin," she said to him, and he laughed because the city had been telling him the opposite for weeks. She went to Sansa and held her like a thing taken out of water and laid in the sun. She went to Arya and held her, and Arya endured it as a brave animal endures the hand that loves it without knowing how to demand more. She went to the king and curtsied, and Robert kissed her cheeks as if he were back in Winterfell and he could smell the meat and hear the dogs and had nothing in his heart that needed to be hidden. "You seized a dwarf," Robert told her, amused and pleased and a little wounded by how the world had moved while he lay under bandages. "He has gone to his father with mountain men in tow. He will be trouble because trouble is what he knows how to cook. We will feed him a different recipe." Catelyn smiled, tired. "I thought I was fetching justice back to a man who would cut me a neat slice," she said. "Instead, I brought him to a woman who would not serve him at all." "I am sorry, Your Grace." "Do not be," Robert said. "You moved the board. We needed it moved." At supper that night, in a hall warmed to the point of complaint by a fire too proud of itself, Marjorie asked Sansa very gently, "Would you like to sit beside me?" Sansa did, and their heads bent together like flowers in a garden that had learned how to survive wind. Across the room, Renly told a story with his hands, while Loras smiled like a man who held the tail of the story and could pull it if it tried to run away. Stannis sat as he always sat, eating like a man who had to be tricked into taking pleasure and then punished for it later. Robert ate well but not too well and drank little and laughed much. He made a promise to himself that the laughter would not make his wound bleed. He kept it. Later that night Arya stood in the godswood that was not and watched the lanterns move in the branches like captive stars. She thought of Winterfell's heart tree and of the face that looked down and did not blink and did not lie. She whispered to it, even though it was not there. She told it she would be a cat tomorrow. Or a fish, she added. Or a shadow. The knot godswood held her words as it held the last light of the day, without judgment, which is a kind of grace. Dawn came, and with dawn came a rider from the west with a Lannister seal and a face tight from riding too far with too little food. He was brought to the hand. Ned read the letter and let the air out of himself slowly. He took it to the king and said only, "He is very near." "Good," Robert said with a grin that showed the boy and the man both. "Let him come. The house is open. We have been cleaning." They went to the map again. Men came and put their fingers on the little wooden pieces as if the pieces were not wood at all but each one a man they owed a debt to. Stannis placed the fleet. Renly placed the Tyrells so that they could be seen by the people who needed to be soothed by green. Ned placed the Riverlands as if he were setting stones in a wall to keep a river out and in. Barristan placed himself, which is to say he stood where he would be needed and nowhere else. Robert placed his will down like a hammer and let the others make the blows ring right. The day Tywin Lannister camped his army outside the walls of a town that had thought itself too unimportant to burn. A girl with hair the color of the moon's grief stood on a quay in Mere debating with a man whose tattoos told a history his voice lied about. She was about to buy ships enough to carry a small war. She lifted her hand and the black dragon on her shoulder lifted his head with it. Men nearby shuddered and told themselves they were cold. In the Red Keep, Sansa sang softly to herself as she walked, and a line of the song, about two lovers separated by a mountain that moved, caught in the air and seemed to belong here. The hound heard it and snorted and did not tell her to shut up. Arya heard it and smiled and did not forgive Sansa because sisters do not forgive so easily. They find ways to stand beside one another when the ground lurches. Joffrey struck a boy in the practice yard and then looked sick with the knowledge that men had seen him do it. The master-at-arms took him aside and spoke to him in a voice that did not tremble. "You will apologize," he said. "A prince does not apologize," Joffrey hissed. "A boy does," the man said. "You are a boy today." And Joffrey did, and it cost him a piece of his rage, which he had hoarded like a coin since he was small. Cersei stood at her window and watched the river make the same gesture it had made yesterday and would make tomorrow and told herself that time could be wound back by an act of will. Jaime sat and mended a strap with hands made for sorcery and killing and thought of oaths and the trick they play on men who mean to keep them. In the evening, when the last of the light sat on the teeth of the city and bled there a little, Robert went to the great hall where skulls had once watched him and watched the war banners instead. He thought of dragons, not with fear now, not with contempt, but with the clarity a man acquires when the world has convinced him it still contains things worth working for. He put his hand on the iron and let it sting. "Come, then," he said softly to no one and to everything. "We were children together, you and I, world. We are older now. Let us see." The night deepened. The city did not sleep. It never had. It rested in spots, like a great beast that knows its enemies and trusts its teeth. Stars held their places and sailors counted them because a man's head must be filled with something while he waits. Far to the east, across water that had made widows into wives of the sea and back again, a girl told her dragons a story about a red door and a lemon tree while her ship's wake unstitched the dark. Morning brought small things that felt like large. A rumor that the queen had tried to bribe a septa and been refused. A new litter found in the alley behind the Inn of the Green Apple with a baby asleep inside and a note pinned to its blanket that said only mercy. A set of boots left outside the smithy with a coin inside one and a note that said, "For the boy." A raven from White Harbor offering salted fish and a plea for work for a dozen strong hands. A report that the alchemists had made a batch of wildfire that had sung in its jars until the song frightened the youngest apprentice and he had dropped a spoon. Pycelle came with nonsense and was sent away with less. Varys came with sense and left with nothing. Littlefinger came with a smile you could have used as a razor and left with the same. And then, at last, as if the world had been holding its breath for just this, the bells began to ring. Not the sept bells and not the alarm, but the gate bells, and men looked to one another and counted the strokes and knew them. A great lord come to parley. The hall filled again. The air was different. Even dust seemed to move with more confidence, as if it believed itself part of history. Tywin Lannister entered like a statement. He had no need of fanfare. It would have diminished him. His cloak was red only where it pleased him to be red. His face was a coin so well-minted time could not dull it. He bowed like a man who remembers everything and forgives nothing. "Your Grace," he said. "Lord Tywin," Robert answered, and the weight of old lies and old necessities hung in the air between them a moment and then drifted to the floor, where men would kick it later without noticing. There, the story narrowed to a point sharp enough to draw blood if anyone breathed too hard. Cersei, behind her guards, watched her father with the cool attention of a daughter who has long been a weapon and wonders, now, whether she will be sheathed or flung. Jaime stood like a man on a bridge over a gorge and pretended not to hear the water. Tywin's words were measured. He asked for proofs and saw them. He asked for witnesses and heard them. He asked for mercy and offered none. He asked for time and knew he would have to take it because no one would give it. He did not rage. Rage wastes. He did not sneer. Sneers are for lesser men who must announce themselves. He did not even bargain aloud. He stood and made the room stand with him. Robert did not roar. It would have been easy, and it would have made everything smaller afterwards. He said only, "The realm will know the truth, and it will not be drowned because we are embarrassed by it. You will stand with the law, or you will stand outside it." Tywin nodded, as if a figure had been added correctly. "And you will live to see your law tested," he said. "Let us see whose walls hold." They all looked, then not at each other but at the map. It lay on the table like a story that had not yet chosen its ending and invited men to write it. Hands went out. Some trembled, some did not, some pretended. Outside, the sea made its old noise, and in the cells beneath the city, the rats kept to their territories like minor lords. Far away, on a deck that smelt of pitch and salt and fish that had been too long fish, a girl with dragons watched a squall form and split and smiled because even storms must choose where to fall. She would choose, too, when she had ships enough and men enough and coin enough and cause enough. She would choose and the world would argue and then go with her or against her. She was not patient. She had learned to wait. The realm held its breath and then took it again because men must breathe to live, and this realm had chosen, for now, to live. The hammer lifted and came down, not to crush, not yet, but to set a nail. The sound rang through the day like a bell that had not been rung in a long time and found that it remembered how. The air in the throne room had the stillness of a paused breath. Men moved in it as if afraid that sound might lean the day the wrong way. Tywin Lannister's gaze measured the space between himself and the Iron Throne and seemed to find it no distance at all. He carried the habit of being obeyed like a scent. Robert sat without sprawling. The old habit, it had cowed many a lesser lord, wanted to drape itself across the arms and lean the crown like a tavern tankard. He held it against himself. The iron beneath the leather pricked once, a private reminder that kingship is a garment lined with needles. "You have spoken your declaration," Tywin said, the words clean as sharpened bone. "I have heard it. I have seen a book." His eye flicked. Not disdainful, simply comprehensive, to the tome that lay on a table beside Ned Stark. "The faith, you say, will inquire. Very well. The faith may inquire into the number of angels that can dance on a needle's point for all I care. It does not change the fact that the realm requires stability. You ask me to accept that you place my grandchildren in doubt." "I asked nothing," Robert said, voice even. "I told the realm what it must hear. I have set Stannis as heir until the faith concludes what everyone with honest eyes already knows." Tywin's face did not flinch. It simply shed all pretense of ornament. "My grandchildren are Lannister and Baratheon both. They have eaten at your table. The law presumes legitimacy where a marriage stands. If you mean to break the law to insult my house, then say so with a soldier's plainness. Stannis stood like a spear that had planted itself in stone. We are not breaking the law. We are enforcing it. If truth discomfits you, it is not the law's duty to cushion you. Renly's mouth twitched with the effort to keep words from leaping off it. The law and the truth have been introduced, he said lightly. It us not make them quarrel in public like relatives who despise one another. The faith will sit. The High Septon put in, damp and dignified both. We will ask and we will listen and we will discern. We are mindful of the doctrine of presumption. We are also mindful of the evidence set before us. You will not put my daughter in chains, Tywin said, nor will you march my grandson through the streets like a felon. If the faith must speak to queens and princes, it will do so with respect, in chambers suitable to their station. Robert inclined his head a fraction. No chains, he said. No street shows, but walls. My guards. She remains here. There was a flicker, no more, at Tywin's temple, the hint of a muscle remembering that it could clench. Then know this. I will not let slander rule my house. If you mean to strip my blood of crowns, you will answer for the insult at sword point and spear tip, in fields where the only book is the ground under a man's feet. Robert's grin arrived like summer thunder. At last. Words I understand. Good. Bring your banners into the light, Lord Tywin. I'll meet banners with banners, bread with bread, law with law. In the meantime, your daughter keeps her rooms, your grandson keeps his head, and the faith keeps its seat. Tywin bowed, as carefully as one sets a blade back into a sheath. Then we are done here. The West will not be told what it is by paper and rumor. He turned to go, and only then did his eyes touch Jaime. No warmth, not even frost. The look a commander gives a troublesome lever, and then Cersei, who met it like polished brass meets sunlight, by reflecting it and throwing it back as something brighter. When the Lannister retinue had withdrawn, the hall sighed as if it had been holding the breath of every throat together and had just remembered it could separate. Robert did not rise at once. He let the iron prick him again and said, almost idly, Eddard. We send a lord with writ and witnesses to bring the mountain to heel. We will not have the riverlands burned while old lions preen. Beric Dondarrion, Ned said, without needing to think. He rides clean. He is beloved in a way that makes men forgive him his youth. Thuras of Myr will go with him. A priest with a flaming sword always makes an arrest sound like a story instead of a levy. His mouth tightened. Ser Edmure will meet them at Riverrun if the raiding worsens. Send them, Robert said, and give them leave to take what they need from my stores. Not the cities. Mine. They sent Beric at midday, banners furled at first, then loose as they struck the street of the sisters, and the crowd found its cheer. The young lord smiled in that awkward, honest way that had charmed half the Southron maids within a week of his first tourney, and bowed from the saddle as if he believed gratitude was owed in both directions. Thuras drank half a skin before he reached the gate and then, with theatrical piety, poured the rest out at the base of the wall. The hound watched them go and spat and said, to no one in particular, they'll be pissing ashes by the time they catch him. Sansa, behind a pillar, flinched at the image, then made herself watch the last of the little company vanish in a cloud of dust like the tail of a dragon who did not yet know how to be seen. Catelyn stood beside Ned as the court murmured themselves into new shapes. You send a boy to fetch a monster, she said in the low tone used for things you cannot prevent and must not approve. I send a banner, Ned said. We must show the Riverlands that law is not a laugh. And if the mountain tears the banner and wipes his arse with it? She asked, fierce and tired. Then we will have done what we were obliged to do, he said. And we will send men, not banners. He touched her hand and found that the old comfort still lived in the simple act of knowing where the bones were. Tywin Lannister did not ride far from the city before the red silk of his tent was struck and raised again. He sat alone for a long time, a map spread before him and a plain dagger set across the mouth of the Blackwater in case the map forgot itself and tried to close. When at length Jaime was admitted, He found his father in the exact posture in which he had left him years ago at Casterly Rock. One hand resting, not quite idly, at the corner of the world. "You stood quiet," Tywin said. "I listened," Jaime replied, taking off his glove finger by finger. "For once, the king said most of what I'd have liked to say if I were drunk and tired of courtesy." "Do you know what men say of you?" Tywin asked in that tone which made the question an accusation even when it was not. "That you killed your king for honor. That you killed your king for convenience. That you killed your king for pleasure. That you are a white cloak emptier than a whore's promise." His eyes did not move from the map. "What do you say of yourself?" "That my oath has a long memory and a poor appetite," Jaime said, reckless, which was to say himself. "It remembers what it wants and starves at inconvenient times." Tywin's mouth did not move. "You will obey," he said. "You will keep your sword and your wit and your tongue at the queen's door. You will keep the boy from making fools your masters. If a spider whispers to him, cut its legs. If that stag points, make certain you know what he points at." "Be careful," Jaime said idly. "You nearly praised me." Tywin finally looked up. "Be useful," he said. "You may even live long enough to be praised." "By whom?" Jaime asked. He laughed, softly.
No.
"Don't answer." He bowed as if the gesture amused him and was out in the light again, blinking against the particular glare of a world that did not care what a man's inside looked like so long as his outside could be made to stand in the right place. Cersei was waiting in the shade of a standard. "He believes he can cough armies out of his sleeve," she said. "And he will until he cannot. He will long after," Jaime said. "He will die believing it." "And we?" she asked. "We will live believing nothing," he said. "With luck." She touched his face once, quick, as if petting a hound she did not own. "Bring me my son," she said. "Or I will bring him myself and slit the city's throat to do it." He caught her hand and kissed the tips of her fingers in a gesture so courtly it became profane. "I will bring him," he said, "or the city will be walking on its hands." In a yard that had seen better play than war, Gendry hammered a strip of raw iron and dreamed. He did not know of Tywin's tent. He did not know of books and laws. He knew the secret throbbing joy of a bar that glowed at the edges and changed shape because he demanded it. He cut horn, fixed it, smoothed it. A bull's head, crude at first, then less so, took form beneath his palm on a helm that would be more folly than defense and defense enough because you cannot teach a boy to see a thing he has never been shown. When he brought it to the king, shy and proud and pretending at neither, Robert laughed. It was a good sound and it hurt. "Wear it," he said, "and run headlong into nothing until I tell you which wall deserves your skull." He ruffled the boy's hair and watched the grin break over his face like a little dawn. "Eat," he added, "and tell the cook if the porridge lacks salt. You have my leave to think of your tongue." Littlefinger sat with Janos Slint in a small counting room whose shutters had been painted a green that flattered no light. He spread his hands till the rings caught candle flame and the chamber seemed, for a breath, to hold more wealth than it did. "It is not a question of loyalty," he purred. "Loyalty is a word poets chew when they have no meat. It is a question of memory. Will your men remember where they put their feet if there is shouting? Will they recall who tells them the difference between a riot and an opportunity? This is my only interest. I am a civic-minded man." Janos Slint had the look of a butcher told he is a surgeon. He knew his knives, at least. He grunted. "My men will look to me," he said. "If they see coin, they will think their wives pretty. If they see lions, they will think their children ill. You give me coin. The king gives me coin. That Stannis fellow gives me looks. I prefer coin." Littlefinger smiled precisely as much as necessary. "You exhaust me with your purity," he said. "All I ask is that when a moment comes, and they always do, you recall which hand placed a purse under your pillow so you need not dream of debt." He pushed a bag that made a reliable sound across the table. Janos put one blunt hand on it and felt suddenly holy. Sirio Farrell made Arya balance a copper on the back of each hand and walk the length of the long gallery without dropping either. The third time she spun around, one slid and rang on the marble and rolled until her foot trapped it. Good, Sirio said. You catch coins. You will catch swords. I like swords better, she said. Coins buy things I don't want. Coins buy time, Sirio said. Time buys swords. You must learn the market. Later, belly flattened against warm stone, she listened at a bronze mouth again, though she had promised herself she would not. You will see that the ship turns north at the Titan, said the breath of a man whose voice she knew without placing it, a voice that smiled even when it was bored. Bravos will not sell us what we want, but it will pretend to consider, and that will be worth something. The girl's movements are a windmill. Everyone thinks it a wind. And the king. The other voice was cautious, with the grit of a long road in it. The king is alive, the first voice sighed. It complicates things by simplifying them. We must be content with smaller matters while we wait for larger ones to trip themselves. Arya heard the soft slide of a door, the purr of silk. She drew back, heart quick, and resolved to be a shadow the next time she broke a promise to herself. The faith's inquiry began not with trumpets but with a list. Names written with a slow hand, on cheap parchment. Midwives, maids, a septa who had taught reading to a girl who never learned to love books except as mirrors. Men of the Kingsguard, 7 in white who had seen more than they meant to and could say less than they wished. Pycelle, who spoke in spirals, and Varys, who spoke in straight lines disguised as spirals. The High Septon presided with cheeks that flushed at impertinence and eyes that sharpened at small truths. In a dim chamber hung with cloth of gold that drank the light and asked for more, the law began its long, ungainly walk. Pycelle coughed and cast his mind back through cobwebs and suggested delicately that color was not destiny. The line of Baratheon has had a great many instances of variation, he said. You will find auburn even in certain branches. In which branches? Stannis asked without rancor, as if asking the hour. Pycelle looked at the book as if it might develop a conscience and leap open to the correct page to save him effort. In the Lannister branches, Stannis said. From marriages with Lannisters. We do not speak here of branches, Grand Maester. We speak of trunks. Ser Barristan came and stood. He did not sit. I have stood long years, he said softly. I am not a man who gossips under banners. But I can tell you what I saw, which is often less than men imagine. The Queen kept her hours. The Kingslayer kept his. When I posted men, they did as they were told. And when my back turned, perhaps sometimes they forgot what they had been told. Did you ever find the Queen with a man who was not the king? The High Septon asked. No, Barristan said. Nor did I ever find the king with a woman who was his queen. He let the truth lie there, heavy and humane as old bread. In the long list, some names had more weight than others. A midwife, old now, hands twisted with time, spoke of births and moons and the peculiar stubbornness of yellow hair when it takes root in a family. If a man has black in him like that man had, the babes catch it like fever, she said bluntly. When they don't, it makes an old woman squint. Cersei did not attend the sessions she was invited to attend. She sent replies on vellum that smelled faintly of oranges, each a work of art in its contempt. The faith will do as it wishes, she wrote once. I will sit here and be queen and let it do so. Perhaps I will embroider while you ask men what they saw when they fetched my bathwater. It makes no difference which servant wrote the history. Men still call it the king's. Joffrey was brought in twice, each time with a tutor and a Kingsguard and dignity like a coat too large. He answered questions with the precise correctness of a boy who has learned there are traps in questions and that it is safer to be boring. Once, when asked what he remembered of his mother's confinement with Tommen, he said coldly, that I was too young to be of use to anyone. That lesson has not changed. At sea, Daenerys Targaryen learned to plant her feet in a way no horse had taught her. The deck rolled and the wind made choices that offended men who thought themselves masters, and she found it. Not freedom, not yet, but a medicine. Captains came to her in Myr and in Tyrosh on decks that smelt of pitch and fear and offered her their ships at a price of coin and glory both. She took what she could afford and smiled at what she could not. She heard, in an incense-laden room above a Tyroshi dye shop, the word unsullied for the first time and felt the syllables like a knife slid under constraints. Eunuchs? The merchant said, nodding, testing her with the vulgarity to see if she'd flinch. Better than a brother's love. They do not run, they do not rape, they do not sleep too much. They do not die like boys in their first blood. They stand like posts. Where? She asked. Astapor? The man said, with the sly pleasure of being needed. Far. But not so far you cannot walk back if you go. After he had gone, Yora stood at the window with his hands on the sill and did not immediately speak. She fed Drogon a sliver of fish he pretended to disdain and then snapped with childish greed. You do not approve, she said. I approve of men who stand, Yora said. I have been one and failed at it often enough to admire those who do it without complaint. I do not approve of the price paid to make them. There is a difference between selling one's sword and selling oneself. I will not buy myself, she said, and went to the little chalk map she had drawn on the table, the chalk lines smudged by an elbow here and there where she had leaned too eagerly. I will buy ships. I will buy men. I will buy time. If slaves are the only coin a city will accept for safety, I will find a way to make it accept something else. He loved her then for saying it that way, which filled him with hope and dread both. Then you will have to be cleverer than a city built on chains, he said. You may be, she decided in the night, sleepless, listening to the sea talk to the hull. We go south, she told him at dawn. We go to Astapor. If the Unsullied are as the man says, we will buy them. If they are worse, we will take something else from the city for our trouble. To go west, I will go east. The mask woman was right. Kaith, Yora said, not fondly but believing. So be it. He looked at the dragons, at the largest one's clever, cruel little eye. Teach them to love you more than they love fire. You will need that. At the wall, the wind sliced like argument. Jeor Mormont's breath smoked as he spoke to the men he would take beyond the gate. You will not be heroes, he said, pragmatic as a boot. You will be cold and hungry and frightened. That is all. But if you come back, you will have put your hands in the dark and found what it hides. There are worse uses for hands. Jon Snow did not go. It felt like a punishment and a promotion both. He drilled in the yard until his sword arm had the clean ache of usefulness and went to the ravens because Sam asked and because birds are simpler than men. He wrote, and then crossed out and wrote again, letters to Winterfell in his head and sent none in reality because words are snow in the wrong season. When the ranging vanished into the trees, he watched until the last black shape had become a dot and then a memory, and only then did he turn and return to his small duties with a new gravity in his step. Salador San brought his laughter ashore with his ships. It made a surprising sound in the stone passage near the King's Gate. You see, he told Davos, gesturing at the harbor where lean galleys now nosed and turned and pretended to be docile. My laughter feeds the hungry. I should be canonized. You should be paid, Davos said dryly. The king will do it if he wishes to keep his harbor full of ships that do not fire themselves. In the council chamber, Salador bowed to Robert with the extravagant grace of a man who knows the value of ease. Your grace, he said, I bring wood that floats and men who do not, at least when sober. I bring oars that can be turned into spears if we grow bored. I bring courage that costs only a small fortune. Robert liked him at once, which made Ned watch him twice as closely. We will make you honest men by accident, Robert said. Sit. Tell me how to keep lions out of my river. Fire, Salador said cheerfully. Ropes, patience, and a little god who lives under the water and eats ships. I know where he sleeps. Stannis nodded, unamused. Chain the river, he said. We do not need gods. We need iron. Chain it, Salador agreed. I will show your smiths a trick with anchors that will make even your northern men admire me. Some of my northern men admire no one, Ned said. Then they will admire themselves in the water when they look at the chain, Salador said and winked, and somehow did not cheapen himself by it. Davos delivered Illyrio's news with the freshness stripped from it by long telling and made useful by the very same fact. She goes south, he finished. Astapor. If she buys eunuchs, she will have discipline. If she buys men who can stand in the face of terror, we will have an enemy we cannot frighten. If she does not buy them, we have a city that will be offended. That is not nothing. Robert rubbed his thumb and forefinger together as if testing the grit of an invisible powder. I will not waste men chasing a girl across seas, he said. But I will not drink stories and call it vigilance. Keep your captain's eyes turned outward. If a ship with a dragon on its sail enters my river, I want it seen before the gulls see it. Varys inclined his head. And if she lands elsewhere? Robert's grin showed a tooth he had cracked as a boy on a peach stone. Then someone else's gulls get to cry first. The stag has more than one field. Evening gentled the city. On a terrace where the air remembered water, Marjorie sat with Sansa and let the girl braid her hair. You do it as if it matters, Marjorie said, amused. It does, Sansa said, brows knit, tongue between her teeth. If a braid is too loose, it falls apart when you need it. Marjorie smiled at that and did not press, because she liked a girl who arrived at sense without being told. When I came, I thought I would bring a garden with me, she confessed. The Red Keep eats gardens. Better than to teach the stones to hold a vine. Can stones learn? Sansa asked. They can be carved, Marjorie said. And if carving is beyond you, you can paint them. Sansa laughed, quietly. I do not think the Queen will allow paint. Then we will hang silk, Marjorie sighed. Silk can lie very convincingly. The hound appeared like a disreputable piece of furniture that the servants had failed to clear away. He leaned against a pillar and pretended not to hear women. You should both be careful, he said finally. Gardens get pruned. Only if they flower in the wrong direction, Marjorie replied sweetly. He gave a rough, unwilling chuckle. You'll do, he said. He looked at Sansa and did not smile. And you, don't sing at men who carry torches. They like to burn things. I wasn't singing, Sansa said, and then flushed because she had been. Lie better, he advised, and was gone in 2 strides, the dogs of his tread scaring a pair of pigeons off the balustrade. Barrack's little column found fire before it found the mountain. Fields smoldered. A blackened stench clung low to the ground as if smoke had learned to crawl. Men from a hamlet with no name hid in the ditch beside the road, eyes scorched white by things they refused to have seen. Gregor, one said to Thuras with the certainty of prayer. We saw him across the water. He laughed. We will find him, Barrack said, more quietly than a boy should promise. They found riders with dogs and knives and no sigil on their cloaks, which was itself a sigil. They found a windmill jammed with corpses to its cap, a parody of industry. They found, once, a little boy sitting alone by a stump, more curious than afraid, fingers greasy with a hen he had stolen before the men who owned it were stolen by the fire. Barrack let him ride on the back of his horse until the boy decided he would rather walk. And then the boy walked away without looking back, and none of the knights could say if they had done a kindness or merely delayed an inevitability. At a ford where the water ran brown and made a sound like the last part of a sob, they found sergeants. Their captain had been beheaded with care. On the head's brow someone had inked a lion with a child's clumsy hand. He wants us to call, Thuras said, nostrils flared at the stink. He is a dog that has eaten offal and wishes for a hand to feed him meat. We will not give him our hand, Barrack said. We will give him the writ. He held up the parchment, which meant nothing to water and less to men like Gregor, and for a little while he let himself believe in it just the same. Tyrion Lannister reached his father's camp with Bronn and a collection of mountain men, who went where the smell of food promised itself loudly and did not linger anywhere they sensed an honest day's work. The red tent stood like a nice threat. He waited, because being made to wait was how his father arranged the world, and passed the time teaching a clansman the value of a copper by making him determine how many turns of a dagger-sharpening stone it should buy. Tywin received his son in a small chamber behind the map, so that Tyrion had to look at the blades of the realm before seeing the blade that had sired him. You got out, Tywin said. Lady Arryn errs in mistaking eccentricity for justice. Her sky door is not to my taste, Tyrion said lightly. I prefer doors that swing rather than drop. Tywin's glance flicked over the mountain men and did not dismiss them. He simply placed them in a column labeled inconvenient. You will be quiet, he said, and useful. You will take a company to secure the crossing at the Green Fork. You will keep your savages leashed. Do not teach the Riverlands to fear Lannister mercy more than Lannister wrath. I have found mercy to be a rumor, Tyrion said. He bowed, which cost him nothing except his neck, and added, as if in passing, the king lives. It vexes the designs of men who had come to rely on drunk fate. Tywin's eyes were as blank as well water. The world bends, he said. We bend it back. Tyrion left with a map that did not show the cunning of its maker and a handful of men who liked him only because he liked them. It is a kind of love that can turn if you give it sun. Bronn fell into step beside him. Your father's a joy, he commented. He is a kind of weather, Tyrion said. You pack for it, or you die. The chain came up out of the foundries like a serpent being dragged from a cave. Men strained at tongs and levers, and the iron sang the same note over and over until the note was in the blood and would not leave even when they slept. Gendry stared and forgot himself in the pleasure of good work that was not his. I could make the links cleaner, he muttered, mostly to hear how it would sound to boast in a room that had earned it. Make your helm sit straight before you straighten the king's chain, the master smith said, not unkind. Here. He put the boy's hand on a hook and made him feel the heft of the link. This is what keeps a river tame. Wait and will. At night, the pyromancers whispered to their jars. Haleen sat in his chamber and wrote a little hymn to heat and then, ashamed of himself, burned it. In one batch of wildfire, the third jar developed a tremor and would not be calmed until the room was emptied of breath. The apprentice who had dropped the spoon remembered his mother's kitchen and left the order of the alchemists 2 hours later without telling anyone. He went to sea on a small fishing boat and fell in love with a girl who did not mind that he cupped his hands around his candle before he blew it out. Jaime stood opposite Barristan in a yard that had been cut down to essentials. Hard ground, the shadows of 2 men, the mild, ever-present roar of a city that pretended it could ignore them. They moved in tight circles at first, testing the air, both old enough to pretend old age did not live in their elbows yet. Steel wrote its short poetry, scratch, ring, hiss, and in it there was something almost like relief. Here were rules. I killed a king for you, Jaime said quietly, blades kissing. For all of you. For everyone who breathes today because the hall did not become a pyre. I have always known it, Barristan said. Knowing it does not make what you did easier to praise. I do not ask praise, Jaime said and quickened his wrist. The old man took it, turned it, chided him gently with the flat. I ask, he laughed. Nothing. I never ask. Ask, Barristan said. The world rarely gives before being asked. Ask what? Jaime said. For a world that keeps its kings from going mad, Barristan answered. You will not get it. But asking makes a man stand straight. They fought until their arms had a pleasant shake and their chests moved like bellows. They stopped without ceremony. In the doorway, Sansa watched them and thought of stories where knights fought for honor's sake and realized, with a little shame and a little pride, that real knights fought because they were men with habits and friends and a desire not to be embarrassed in front of squires. In the sept, a saint's painted eyes watched the high septon drip candle wax onto a page that named the conditions of the inquiry's next phase. Varys stood at an oblique angle to the light and seemed, for a breath, to disappear. There is a way to make this end clean, he said to Ned later, in a corridor where a draft tried to turn their cloaks into flags. Cleans are for linen, Ned answered. This will end with a stain no matter what we do. Better that the stain be on my hands than on the law's throat. You are very northern, Varys observed, amused and respectful both. It is one of your charms and one of your errors. Perhaps, Ned said. I find I stop caring for charm when the world threatens to burn. You should go north one day, Varys said, and moved on like silk. On the Rose Road, a Tyrell cook scolded his apprentice for burning onions and quietly passed a loaf to a gaggle of small folk too proud to beg. Later that night, those same folk spoke in love of the Tyrell's bounty 4 times as loudly as they would have if the loaf had been thrown from a cart. Marjorie dined at the king's right that evening. She did not preen. She listened. When Robert made a bawdy joke, she laughed, but as if the bawdiness were a shared secret, not a public event. Stannis watched her as a surgeon watches a poultice applied by someone not trained to save lives and waits to see if the fever breaks or worsens. Renly watched his brother with a tenderness that would have surprised any man who knew his ambition better than his heart. Later, when they stood with a jug between them and the lists of levies by the lamplight, Renly said softly, "You did not swagger today." "I do not have to," Robert said. "I remember when I did." "It suited you," Renly said. "It killed me slowly," Robert replied, a half-smile. "I have chosen a new poison." "What is its name?" "Restraint," Robert said, and they both laughed at that. Stannis did not. When he came in with Davos and Salador at his shoulder like Ghost and Harlequin, he laid 2 fingers on the map. "Tywin will test us within a fortnight," he said. "At the Mummers' Ford, perhaps, or farther north where the crossings are better known to his captains. He will not risk the city until he has cut our hands off. Then we strike first," Robert said, eager as a boy for a moment, and then reined himself. "Carefully. Send word to Tully. Tell him Beric carries our seal and the law both. Tell him to bleed the lion, not wrestle him." "And the veil?" Ned asked. "They will come when they believe they will be thanked longer than they will be used," Renly said. "In other words, they will not come for some while." "Send a letter to Jon Arryn's widow anyway," Robert said, surprising them, perhaps himself. "Write to the boy. Tell him his king remembers flying with him on falcon's feathers." Ned's expression did not change. He wrote 2 letters that night, one polite and useless, one useless and polite. He sealed both and did not deceive himself that either would change a woman who had replaced sense with pride. At Dragonstone, Melisandre stood before a brazier and watched the coals as if they were a book only she could read. Celis Florent hovered near, sallow with piety. "Your lord burns bright," the Red Woman said. "He stands in a hall of shadows, but he is not shadowed. For now." "And when the girl comes?" Celis asked, as if the words had been slipped onto her tongue by someone else. "Girl." Melisandre's brows lifted. "There are many girls. You must be more precise when you speak to Lawler. He does not answer prayers addressed to crowds." "The Targaryen," Celis said, a little irreverently for a zealot. But the Red Woman's presence encouraged blasphemies of a certain shape. "With her beasts." Melisandre smiled in that small, secret line that meant she knew more than she would tell anyone with ears. "Fire answers fire," she murmured. "But not always as mortals intend. Do not fear the girl. Fear the cold." Celis shuddered delicately. "I fear what I am told to fear," she said, and then, flustered by her own honesty, asked for a sign. Melisandre tossed a pinch of powder into the coals, which flared briefly green and then remembered themselves and returned to red. "A sign," she said, as if humor were a sacrament. "There." On a morning that came in with low cloud like a hat pulled down over the city's eyes, the first real clash with Lannister foragers was reported at Cobbler's Cross. Stannis sat like a whetstone as Ned gave the particulars. A patrol of Goldcloaks, 3 Tyrell riders idling as messengers, and a dozen of Stannis' Stormlanders had driven a band of raiders into the hedges and killed them where they had crouched, except for one who had jumped a ditch and fled and fallen in his own haste on his own knife. It was nothing in the order of war. It was everything in the order of days. "Tiny lessons," Stannis said. "We teach them one by one and hope men learn small books faster than big ones. Sometimes the small books are the only ones men will read," Renly said. Robert rose. "We have painted our door," he announced. "Let the lion see what knock he favors." The day's business done, he went alone, save for Barristan, who was alone with him, to the great hall that had once held skulls. The banners moved a little in a draught from somewhere men had forgotten to seal. I have been a fool, he said to no one and to his friend, which is occasionally the same thing. You have been a man, Barristan said. That is the same, Robert said, amused. Not always, Barristan said, and smiled for once without looking at the past over the smile's shoulder. Not always. Robert's hand found the arm of a chair that had hurt him years without him noticing, and now did not hurt him because he expected it to. I mean to live, he said aloud, like a challenge to the gods or to his own body, long enough to do one thing right without men singing about it wrong after. Barristan did not answer. The hall did not answer. The iron did not answer. For once silence sounded like consent. Night in Pentos. Illyrio slept with a silk sheet on his belly, and, when he turned, woke and felt loneliness press down like a fat cat. He sat up and ate a fig and thought of dragons. He did not fear them. He feared men's love of them. He had built fortunes on men's loves. He had buried others under the same brick. Astapor, he murmured to his chamber, to the idea of a girl crossing a sea to stand in a city that trains boys to be statues. Go, little queen. Find your army. Make all our work worth something that lasts a year. In the not Godswood, Arya climbed a tree not meant for climbing and found, at its knee, a little hollow like a cup. She kept a smooth stone there, white as milk. She set a second beside it, black and pocked. Dragon, she whispered to one. Boar, she whispered to the other. She did not know yet why the game needed both. Syrio would have approved. Sansa, on her way back from the sept where she had lit a candle and not prayed out loud, saw her sister drop from a branch and roll and come up in one soft movement, and felt a terrible love and a terrible envy and then a sudden silly beforetaste of laughter. You will break your neck, she said, in the tone of an older sister who knows she will not be believed. I won't, Arya said, not sullen. I am keeping the city from breaking hers. How? Sansa asked, genuinely curious. I am practicing, Arya said simply, so I can be what is needed when it is needed. Sansa thought for a moment. That is a very northern answer, she said, and surprised herself by liking it. Downriver, beyond the turn where fishermen say the river ceases to be fresh, the first of Salador's anchor tricks was laid. Great stones and chains sunk with care, with counting, with curses. The harbor learned a new sound. Links grinding against one another under water like teeth in the mouth of a god. On the road west, Beric caught a scent. Ash and horse and something that made his men's hands seek sword grips. He set his jaw. Here, he said, and turned into the hedgerow with the easy courage of men who have not yet learned all the kinds of fear the world can teach. Thuras lit his sword, the oil catching with a cheerful whoosh, and for a moment they were storybook men, and then the woods spit men who were only men back at them, and steel made conversation. Gregor was not there, but his shadow was. It put two of Beric's men on the ground and left them learning how quiet their blood could be and ran again. Beric stood with his writ in his hand, foolish and holy, and lifted it as if a man with a sigil might be shamed by paper. In the king's name, he cried, and the hedgerow laughed leaves in his face and swallowed the last of the raiders. We will see him soon, Thuras said. No monster misses a chance to be seen. Tywin's reply to Robert's summons was not another parley. It was a movement of troops on 3 roads at once. One to feel for a crossing the river lords had failed to guard, one to burn grain that might feed a siege, and one to show themselves boldly under a hill with a name men had forgotten in peacetime. He wants us to divide, Stannis observed, laying tokens on the map with the cold patience of a man building a wall against a high tide. Then we will pretend to, Robert said, and his eyes brightened with an old light that had nothing of wine in it. They worked until the candles guttered and the window turned black and simply stayed that way. Ned felt the ache of his old wound in his leg, the one weather woke. He ignored it. When at last they parted, Robert took his friend by the shoulder and said in the quiet that is the truest kind, "Thank you for showing me the book, for not waiting another day to show me, for making me remember I can do a hard thing without a cup to aid me." Ned's answer was not words. It was the clasp of a forearm and the look they had shared under a different sky when the world seemed enormous and yet simple in the way only the young can believe it is. They were not young. The world was not simple, but the clasp held. Far to the east, in a bay that stank of brine and bluster, Daenerys stood with her dragons. No longer elfling things now, their wings stronger, their hunger greater, and watched an Astapori galley with its squared sail tack out to sea. The city behind her was a line of low red brick and cruelty. She tasted iron on her tongue. Not blood, not yet. "We will take them," she told Yora. "We will take them," he agreed, because he had already counted her coin and the coin she did not have and the coin men would lend to stand near fire. "And then west. And then," she said and smiled without warmth. Drogon flared his wings. The wind caught at them and made a sound like a banner opening. Morning in King's Landing brought bells and bread and a letter from White Harbor saying men could be sent south if the way were made safe and the cost clear. It brought news that a ship suspected of carrying Lannister letters had been seized by Stormlanders near Massey's Hook. It brought the sight of Joffrey in the yard, cheeks flushed not with anger but with effort, cutting at straw under a hard-eyed master who did not let him put down the sword until his shoulders shook. It brought a report that the mountain had been seen in the company of Amory Lorch. It brought laughter from Renly's quarter and a silent, satisfied nod from Stannis when a list of completed chain links was placed in his hand. It brought, above all, a sense that the hinge had been found and greased. Doors would open and shut. Men would go out and come in. Battles would be met and endured and avoided and invited. The city, which had been holding its breath for so long that its face had turned a little blue, let it out and then took another, because there is nothing else to do. Robert stood on the rampart with Barristan and watched the river carry light like coins. "I feel," he said, "like a man at the crest of a hill who can see two valleys and knows that in one there is wine and in the other there is water, and that he must choose water because it will get him farther." Barristan frowned, as if making a tally. "A hard choice." "A good one," Robert said, surprising himself. He rested his hands on the warm stone and looked east until his eyes ached as if distance were a weight a man could put down only by blinking. He thought of a girl with 3 small dragons and a will that had survived tents and pyres. He thought of a boy his not boy sweating under a wooden sword. He thought of a woman with hair like a trap and a father-in-law who had turned himself into a machine so thoroughly that even his sighs were efficient. He thought of the north, of a wall of ice, of a letter that had said little and said everything. "Let them come," he said again, and the river made its old reply and psalm. You were in the city, a girl leapt from a wall and landed cat-soft and laughed, and a woman in blue silk threaded a needle and decided that today she would embroider thorns instead of roses, and a man with missing fingers counted ships by sound and knew the city had bought itself another week, perhaps 2. Far at sea, the wake of a ship spelled a brief word the water understood and then forgot, and Drogon, from a mast where he had no right to be, opened his mouth and let a thin line of fire taste the morning and go out, satisfied for now with practice.